So, here we are. It's late, or early, depending on how you look at it. And I've been thinking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which, I'll be honest, is something I do more often than I probably should. Not in a stressful way, more like how you sometimes just find yourself thinking about a place you know really well. Wandering the hallways of it in your head, noticing things you hadn't really stopped to look at before. That's sort of what tonight is. Not a ranked list, not a deep argument about who could beat who in a fight, or which phase was the best phase. Just a slow walk through a fictional universe that a lot of people know the surface of, but not necessarily the depths of. The lore underneath the plot, the details that didn't make the trailer, the small things that, when you know them, make the whole world feel a little more real, a little more lived in. The MCU is one of those rare fictional universes where you can just wander. There's always something to sit with, a corner of it you haven't properly explored yet. And at this time of night, that's exactly the kind of thing I want. We'll move through it loosely. No strict timeline, no pressure to keep up. Asgard for a bit, the cosmos, some of the stranger corners of Earth, the multiverse when we get there. The goal isn't to cover everything, it's just to spend some time in a world that 20-odd films and a dozen TV series in has gotten genuinely interesting in the way only worlds built over a long time can get interesting. If you've seen everything, brilliant. You'll know a lot of what comes up tonight, but hopefully there's still something here that catches you off guard. If you haven't seen it all so far, that's fine too. This isn't a quiz. Nothing tonight requires homework. And if you're already half asleep, good. That's exactly where you should be. One of the things that makes the MCU interesting to spend time with at this hour is that it's genuinely layered. There are things in the background of these films that reward attention without demanding it. A character who appears in the background of a crowd scene in one film and gets a whole story in another. A line of dialogue that seems like throwaway humour and turns out to be foreshadowing something 3 films away. Details about how the world works, who governs what, how technology spreads, what the people who aren't heroes do when the sky is falling. That the films don't have time to fully explain, but that you can feel underneath everything if you know where to look. That's what tonight is about mostly. Looking underneath, following threads, spending a bit of time with the parts of this world that usually get moved past quickly in service of the next plot point. There's also just the pleasure of spending time in a world that's been constructed with genuine care over a long period. Not everything in the MCU is great. Not every film is equally successful. But the world itself has accrued a texture over 20+ years that most fictional universes don't get time to develop. It has a history. It has corners. It has things that have been consistent from the first film to the last one. Not because anyone planned every detail from the start, but because the people making it cared enough to be consistent about the things that mattered. That's worth appreciating, I think. At this time of night, with no particular agenda, in no particular hurry. If you enjoy this kind of long, slow, wandering lore content, feel free to subscribe. I make these fairly regularly, and I've got a whole list of fictional universes I want to do this with. But no pressure. You can just settle in. Let's start at the very beginning, which in the case of the MCU is before the universe existed. Almost everything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, every major catastrophe, every villain with a plan, every sacrifice that meant something, traces back, eventually, to 6 rocks. I know that sounds reductive, it's not, I promise, but there's something almost funny about how tidy that is. 23 films, dozens of characters, storylines spanning galaxies and dimensions, and decades, and the engine under all of it is 6 objects about the size of your fist. The in-universe explanation for what the Infinity Stones actually are is genuinely fascinating, and it's the kind of thing the films mention once and then move past, which means a lot of people missed it. The stones are described as singularities that existed before the Big Bang, concentrated forces of nature, remnants of the conditions that created the universe itself. Given physical form, after the universe expanded and cooled. Each one represents a fundamental aspect of existence: space, mind, reality, power, time, soul, 6 things that, between them, sort of cover everything. Which means when Thanos assembles all 6 and uses them, he's not just using powerful weapons, he's wielding the fundamental forces of the universe itself. That's why a snap of his fingers can reshape all of existence in an instant. He's not doing something unnatural, he's just operating the universe directly, without the usual intermediaries. And here's the detail I find most interesting about that. The gauntlet that houses them, the Infinity Gauntlet, was forged by the dwarves of Nidavellir specifically to channel that power without destroying the wearer instantly. Even so, using the full power of all 6 stones nearly kills whoever does it. Bruce Banner's arm is permanently damaged. Tony Stark is killed. Thanos himself is burned beyond recovery after his own snap. The gauntlet is the most powerful object ever created, and it's still barely enough to keep the user alive through the process. That's a nice piece of lore. The universe's greatest power requires the universe's greatest sacrifice just to operate. But let's talk about the stones individually, because each one has its own story. The Space Stone is the one that's been around longest in terms of the MCU's history. It lives inside a blue cube called the Tesseract, which looks, if you're a human encountering it for the first time, like a very intense paperweight. The Tesseract spent time in Asgard, then fell to Earth during the Second World War, and was found by Hydra, who used it to power advanced weapons. It was recovered from the bottom of the ocean alongside Steve Rogers, and spent decades in SHIELD custody being studied. Various people wanted it. Various people failed to hold on to it. The Space Stone is the universe's way of saying that some things don't stay put. What it actually does is allow travel through space instantly. It can open portals across any distance, bend space, teleport things. When Thanos uses it in Infinity War, he's essentially skipping across the galaxy in moments. And the casual detail I love about it is that Loki was handed this incredibly powerful object when Thanos sent him to Earth in the Avengers. A fact Loki probably didn't fully appreciate at the time, and which Thanos retrieved very easily afterward when Loki's plan failed. Thanos basically lent someone an Infinity Stone and then just took it back. That tells you something about their relative power. The Mind Stone has one of the more complicated histories, because for a long time, no one realised it was an Infinity Stone at all. It arrived in the MCU housed inside Loki's scepter, a blue gem that could control minds and project energy. It was used by Loki to control Hawkeye and various SHIELD agents. Then Hydra got hold of it and used it to experiment on the Maximoff twins, which is how Wanda and Pietro got their abilities. Then Tony Stark and Bruce Banner used it to create Ultron, with famously chaotic results. Then Ultron put it in Vision's forehead, where it gave Vision his consciousness and his life. Then Thanos killed Vision to get it back. The Mind Stone has the most hands-on history of all the stones. It's been touched by more people, caused more specific damage than any of the others. And there's something quietly dark about the fact that it's the stone most associated with consciousness, with thought and identity, and it spent most of its MCU existence being used as a weapon. The Reality Stone is the weird one. It's not a stone at all in its natural form. It's a liquid dark matter called the ether, which seeks out a host body and spreads through them. Jane Foster becomes its involuntary carrier in Thor, the Dark World, which nearly kills her. Malekith, the dark elf villain of that film, wants to use it to plunge the universe into darkness during a cosmic event called the Convergence. He's stopped, obviously, but the ether is left over and eventually given to the Collector for safekeeping because, and this is actually the stated reasoning, you shouldn't keep 2 Infinity Stones in the same place, which is a perfectly sensible policy. The MCU's track record of keeping Infinity Stones safe after that point is charitably not great. The Power Stone is the most blunt of the six. It's pure destructive energy. Anyone who directly touches it without sufficient constitution is immediately overwhelmed and killed. The Guardians of the Galaxy's entire first film centers on this thing. Peter Quill steals it, various people try to take it, and the climax involves all 5 Guardians joining hands to share its power between them, which should have killed all of them individually, but somehow doesn't because the film decides their emotional bond is a factor. Which is a very Marvel way of explaining physics, but I have a soft spot for it. After the first Guardians film, the Power Stone is held by the Nova Corps on Xandar. Thanos destroys Xandar off-screen before Infinity War begins to get it, which is mentioned in passing and is sort of staggering if you think about it. An entire planet and its civilization wiped out in the minutes before the film even starts. The Time Stone lives inside the Eye of Agamotto, an amulet worn by the Sorcerer Supreme of Earth. Doctor Strange inherits it from the Ancient One, who apparently used it for centuries to look forward and plan. Strange uses it famously in Infinity War to examine 14,605 possible futures and find the single one where the heroes win. He watches all of those futures, every possible configuration of events across millions of possibilities. Then he hands Thanos the stone to save Tony Stark's life, which seems like a betrayal until you understand it's not. It's the plan. I do think about what it would be like to watch 14 million futures in sequence. Even if it's instantaneous from the outside, Strange experiences all of them. That's a lot of deaths to witness, including your own, in presumably most of those scenarios. The Soul Stone is the last one, and the strangest one, because for a long time in the story, and in real time across multiple years of films, nobody knows where it is. It's on a planet called Vormir, at what seems to be the edge of known space, and it's guarded by someone very unexpected. Johann Schmidt, the Red Skull, the villain from the first Captain America film. He tried to use the Tesseract as a weapon in 1945, and it sent him through space to Vormir, where he became the stone's eternal guardian, able to direct others to it, unable to touch it himself, unable to leave. That's a genuinely grim fate for someone who was defeated at the height of his power. The Soul Stone's price is a life, the thing you love most. This is what Thanos sacrifices Gamora for, and later, what Natasha Romanoff dies for, so Clint Barton can carry the stone back. The stone doesn't take just anyone. It takes what you actually love, which means it tests whether you're capable of genuine attachment in the first place. There's something melancholy about the stones as a group. They've existed since before time. They'll exist after everything else is gone. They've passed through countless hands, caused incalculable suffering, and the universe keeps producing people who want to use them for something. Every civilization that finds one either destroys itself trying to use it, or manages to pass it on before it causes too much damage. The stones are patient. They have nothing but time. Something worth noting about how the stones interact with the mortals who use them. Almost every person who has ever tried to wield one alone has been destroyed or changed irrevocably by the experience. Thanos burns out his arm using the full gauntlet. Bruce Banner permanently damages his. Tony Stark dies. Even Nebula, whose cybernetic systems were far more robust than organic tissue, was not immune to their influence when her implants interfaced accidentally with the time travel machinery in Endgame. The only being who seems to handle a stone without particular consequence is the Vision. But Vision has the Mind Stone built into his forehead and is partly constructed from the stone's energy. He's not wielding it so much as being it. That's a different relationship entirely. What's also interesting is the way the stones respond to intention. The Soul Stone requires sacrifice. Not just any sacrifice, but the sacrifice of love specifically. It has a moral test built into it. The Time Stone, through its history with the Ancient One, and then Strange, seems to have enabled both of them to see more than they might have been psychologically equipped to see. Strange watches millions of possible endings and remains functional. Whether any ordinary person would have survived the same experience is an open question. The Infinity Gauntlet that was forged for all 6 stones by Eitri, the last surviving dwarf of Nidavellir, under duress, with his hands encased in metal by Thanos afterward to ensure he could never forge anything again, is made of Uru metal, the same material as Mjolnir and later Stormbreaker. It's the strongest material in the known universe, and even Uru, even the gauntlet crafted specifically to channel the stone's combined power, is effectively destroyed by one use of all 6 at once. The power required to reshape the universe erases the vessel that made it possible. There's something almost ecological about that. The stones can be used once, maybe twice at full capacity, then the mechanism that allowed it is gone. The universe seems to protect itself from indefinite reshaping. The post-Infinity War stones, after Thanos uses them a second time to destroy themselves, are gone from the main timeline entirely. Their absence is a genuine fact in the MCU going forward. Whatever cosmic threats arise in future films cannot be resolved with the stones because the stones don't exist anymore. The universe's great equalizer is simply not available. What replaces it as the governing force of cosmic conflict is at this point still unclear. Since we're thinking about cosmic things, let's go somewhere specific. Let's go to Asgard. Asgard isn't a planet. That's the first thing that trips people up, and it's worth correcting early. When Thor talks about Asgard, he's not talking about a rock orbiting a star. He's talking about a realm, a place that exists in a cosmological framework that's different from our solar system model. The MCU's universe has 9 realms, connected by something called Yggdrasil, the world tree. Not a literal tree exactly, more like a structural metaphor for the connections between these places. Pathways through space, or possibly through dimensions, depending on which film is explaining it. The 9 realms are Asgard, Midgard, that's us Earth, Jotunheim, the realm of the frost giants, Svartalfheim, the dark elves, Nidavellir, the dwarven forge world, Vanaheim, Alfheim, Muspelheim, fire demons where Surtur lives, and Hel, realm of the dead, ruled by, though this is mostly implied rather than shown, Hela until she's imprisoned. Each realm has its own geography, its own civilization, its own particular flavour of cosmic weirdness. Asgard sits at the centre of this framework, which is both a geographical fact and a political one. The Asgardians have appointed themselves protectors of the 9 realms, which the inhabitants of other realms may or may not have been consulted about. The civilization itself is fascinating and deliberately contradictory. On the surface, Asgard looks like a golden utopia. Vast towers, advanced technology, warriors of extraordinary capability, a culture that values honour and battle and loyalty. And it genuinely is those things. But the MCU slowly reveals, across 3 Thor films and into Ragnarok, that Asgard is also a place built on things being kept quiet. Odin is the key to understanding this. The All-Father, played with tremendous gravitas by Anthony Hopkins, presents as a wise, measured ruler in his first appearance. And he is wise, in a genuine sense. But he's also someone who conquered the 9 realms alongside his firstborn daughter, then erased that history from the cultural record when he decided peace was more useful than conquest. The murals in the throne room of Asgard show a sanitized version of Asgardian history. When Hela returns in Ragnarok, one of the first things she does is reach up and transform the ceiling fresco back to its original form, which shows the conquest, the violence, the bodies, and casually says, "I remember when this was on the ceiling." That moment is played quickly and without much comment, but it's a fairly significant political statement. The founding myth of Asgard is a lie Odin told his people. He built a civilization on an edited version of its own history, because the true version was inconvenient. And then he did the same thing with Hela herself. Hela is Odin's firstborn, his executioner, the being who personally carried out Asgard's expansion across the 9 realms. When Odin decided that enough was enough, that Asgard had conquered what it needed to conquer and should now hold a more peaceful position, Hela disagreed. She wanted to keep going. She was a weapon and she had been built for a purpose, and Odin was suddenly telling her that purpose was over. So he imprisoned her in another dimension, bound by a magical seal tied to his own life force, and told his other children she didn't exist. That's the version of Odin you get in Ragnarok, and it does quite a lot to complicate your earlier impressions of him. He's not wrong that Hela's dangerous. She absolutely is. But there's a difference between imprisoning someone for what they've done and imprisoning someone because they're inconvenient to your new image. Odin does both, and doesn't seem to spend much time distinguishing between them. He's dying throughout Ragnarok, and there's a scene in Norway where he finds a measure of peace before he goes, watching the ocean, speaking to Thor and Loki with something like honesty for probably the first time. He acknowledges Hela, he acknowledges his failures, he dies looking at the sea, and the instant he does, the seal breaks, and Hela comes through. One thing about Odin's death that the films handle well, it's not dramatic. He just fades into golden light on a Norwegian clifftop, speaking to his sons. After all that power, all those centuries, that's what the ending looks like, quiet. The films don't make a big deal of it, which makes it land differently than you might expect. Frigga deserves more time than she typically gets in these conversations. She's Queen of Asgard, wife to Odin, mother to Thor, and adoptive mother to Loki. And she's also, quietly, the most emotionally intelligent person in Asgard. She taught Loki his magic, not Odin, not any tutor, Frigga, which means everything Loki does with sorcery, every illusion, every trick, every conjuration, all of it came from her. That detail reframes their relationship considerably. She saw something in Loki worth cultivating. Her death in the Dark World, when the Dark Elves invade Asgard and she's killed protecting Jane Foster, is one of those MCU moments that hits harder than the film around it probably deserves. She faces Malekith without flinching. She doesn't have the raw power that Thor or Odin have. She has intelligence and courage, and she uses both completely. The grief that follows her death carries all the way through to Ragnarok and into Endgame, where Thor visits her in 2013 during the time heist, and she speaks to him with the kind of insight that cuts right through his self-pity. "You're not the Thor I know, but I know what you need," she says essentially, and she gives it to him, no questions asked. Asgard's relationship with Earth is one of the more charming pieces of background lore. The Norse peoples worshipped the Asgardians as gods, Thor, Odin, Loki, all of them, because they visited Earth regularly, and being effectively immortal warriors with vast power presented as divine. The MCU acknowledges this fairly casually. Thor doesn't seem embarrassed by it. He doesn't find it particularly remarkable. To him, it's just historical fact. "Your ancestors called it magic," he tells Selvig in the first film, "and you call it science. I come from a place where they are one and the same." Which is a genuinely elegant way of handling the science versus mythology question. The physical structure of Asgard itself is worth dwelling on briefly. The realm sits on a floating landmass surrounded by an enormous waterfall. The Asgardian sea flows off the edge of the world because the world has an edge. The Golden City is built on this plateau, dense and towering, with the palace at its centre. The architecture is a combination of advanced technology and what looks like ancient stone, and the MCU never fully explains how they coexist, which I think is the right call. Some things are better if you can't quite understand them. The Asgardian people themselves are presented as a warrior culture, but one with real depth. They have storytellers and healers and craftspeople and architects. They have celebrations and traditions. They grieve their dead, formally. The boat funeral in the Dark World for Frigga is one of the more beautiful sequences in the Thor films. Hundreds of small lights released onto the water as the ships burn. They have a culture, not just a military. Heimdall is worth a moment here. He watches over the 9 realms from his post at the Bifrost Observatory, seeing everything and everyone across the realms simultaneously. His vision extends across the cosmos. He tells Thor in the first film that he can hear the blood pumping through the hearts of billions of people. That level of sensory experience, constant, global, inescapable, is its own kind of burden, and Heimdall carries it with extraordinary stillness. He's also one of the more genuinely good characters in the franchise. He opens the Bifrost for Thor when Odin has forbidden it, because he decides his duty is to Asgard's safety rather than the king's orders. And he's right. He protects the surviving Asgardians in Ragnarok by smuggling them to safety. His last act in Infinity War is to summon the Bifrost for Bruce Banner to get him to Earth, an act that lets Thanos know that Heimdall is a loose end, and that costs Heimdall his life. He's never a protagonist, but he's always on the right side of every choice he makes. The Einherjar, Asgard's warrior class, and the structure of Asgardian society beneath the royal family is largely background detail, but the films give you enough texture to feel that it's a real civilization, with real internal dynamics. The Warriors 3, Volstagg, Hogun, Fandral, and Sif are the most visible examples of a military culture with genuine loyalty and genuine courage. And their treatment in Ragnarok, where they're killed off-screen by Hela upon her arrival, almost as an establishing shot of her power, is one of the more casually brutal choices in that film. People who've been around since the first film, dispatched in moments. It underlines how fundamentally different Hela is from any threat Asgard has faced before. The Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connects the realms, is another detail worth sitting with. It's not just a transport mechanism, it's a weapon. When focused on a target location, the Bifrost can destroy it. This is actually how Odin planned to destroy Jotunheim before Thor sacrifices the Bifrost bridge in the first film to stop it. The destruction of the Bifrost in that film has consequences. It cuts Asgard off from the other realms until it's rebuilt, which is why Thor can't reach Earth for most of Thor 2's gap period. Asgard, then, is a civilization that is golden and ancient and genuinely impressive, and also one that has built its identity around things being kept quiet. The history is more violent than the murals suggest, the family is more complicated than the mythology suggests, and the peace is more fragile than it appears. Which brings us, inevitably, to Loki. Let me make a case for Loki. Not as a sympathetic villain exactly. He causes genuine harm across multiple films, and that shouldn't be hand-waved. But as a character whose motivations, when you follow them properly, make complete sense from inside his own head. He was found as an infant on Jotunheim, left to die in the cold by Laufey, the frost giant king, because he was small by frost giant standards, which is still enormous by human standards. But the point is, he was considered deficient. Odin found him during the aftermath of the war with Jotunheim and took him, raised him as his own, named him Loki Odinson. The reason Odin took him, he later explains, was political. He hoped that Loki could one day be used as a bridge between Asgard and Jotunheim. A frost giant raised as an Asgardian, who could perhaps ease relations between the two realms. That's a fairly cold calculation. That's using an infant as a diplomatic instrument. Odin probably also had genuine affection for Loki. The film suggests this, and I think it's real. But the foundation of the adoption is strategy as much as love. Loki doesn't learn any of this until the first Thor film. He finds out he's a frost giant when Laufey grabs his arm during the fight in Jotunheim, and the frost touch doesn't hurt him. He goes pale, or rather, his skin goes blue and his eyes go red. And he realizes, right there, in the middle of a battle, that he is the thing Asgard has spent centuries defining itself against. The thing Thor called monsters just minutes ago. The identity crisis that follows is what drives the rest of the film. Loki is not trying to conquer Asgard for power exactly. He's trying to prove something. To Odin, to Asgard, possibly most of all to himself. He arranges for Laufey to come and kill Odin, then kills Laufey himself. The logic, as he explains it, is that he will save Odin, and in doing so, prove his loyalty and his worth. and then he tries to destroy Jotunheim entirely, to eliminate the problem of his own heritage at its source. "I could have done it, father," he tells Odin at the end. "I could have done it for you." That's not the speech of someone who wants power. That's the speech of a son who wants to be seen. Odin's response, "No, Loki," is compassionate but insufficient, and Loki lets go of the Bifrost Bridge and falls into the void rather than be pulled back up. It's an act of despair dressed as defiance. By the Avengers, something has hardened. The Loki who comes back from wherever he fell to via Thanos' network is angrier and more performative in his villainy. He still wants validation, but now he wants it through conquest. He's going to rule something, since belonging to something was apparently unavailable. His invasion of Earth fails, and he's taken back to Asgard in chains. The version of Loki in the Dark World is interesting because it's quieter. He's imprisoned, his mother is dead, and he doesn't have much left to perform for. When Thor comes to him for help, there's a genuine exchange between them. Not brothers exactly, but people who are connected by something they can't fully articulate. Loki helps. He saves Jane's life in Svartalfheim. He apparently dies. He's actually, of course, faking his death and ending up on the throne disguised as Odin, which is a very Loki thing to do. He couldn't resist. In Ragnarok, something shifts. When the actual crisis comes, Hela, the destruction of Asgard, Loki shows up. He comes back with a ship full of Sakaran warriors and helps his brother evacuate their people. It's the first time in the films where he chooses the side he was supposed to be on. Not for approval, not for a throne, just because it was right. He dies in Infinity War without tricks. He hands over the Space Stone, attempts to assassinate Thanos with a hidden dagger, fails, and is killed with his hands around Thanos' wrist, still trying. His last words are, "You will never be a god," addressed to someone who is, by any measure, more powerful than he is. It's defiance as identity, a final statement about what Loki actually valued, which was something more than power. The 2012 version of Loki, the one who branches off in Endgame by escaping with the Tesseract, is essentially Loki before any of that development. He becomes the foundation of the Loki series, and we'll talk about that in detail later. One of the reasons the Loki series works so well is that it takes the character at his most self-interested and shows him very slowly working towards something that looks a lot like what the main Loki eventually died for. One fun detail that doesn't get mentioned often. Loki's magic, as established by the films, is almost entirely illusion-based. He can make himself look like other people, project copies of himself, create things that appear real but aren't. He is genuinely not the most powerful being in any room he's ever been in, and he's known this his entire life. He's always been fighting with tools rather than strength, which is, I think, part of why people respond to him. There's something recognisably human about compensating for not being the strongest person in the room. There's also a reading of Loki as someone who was always searching for a framework in which he was legitimate. In Asgard, he's the second prince, the trickster, the one who is valuable but not essential. When he discovers he's a frost giant, he loses even that. He's not just second, but illegitimate, an imposter in the Golden City. The attempt to destroy Jotunheim is, in that reading, an attempt to erase the evidence of his own origin. If there are no frost giants, there's no version of Loki that is one. It doesn't work that way, of course. You can't destroy your identity by destroying its source. But the logic of the attempt makes sense from inside his head. His relationship with Frigga is the emotional anchor of his character in a way that sometimes gets underplayed. She taught him magic. She is, by definition, the person who saw something in him worth nurturing, not just managing or containing, but actually developing. When she's killed in the Dark World, his grief is real and specific. He doesn't perform it for anyone. He breaks things in his cell alone, where no one is watching. That's the most Loki moment in the entire film. The Dark World version of Loki, working alongside Thor against Malekith, apparently dying in the process, is interesting because it's the first time in the films where Loki's interest in self-preservation gives way to something else. He saves Jane Foster's life. He fights Malekith directly. The death is faked, yes, he ultimately ends up on the throne of Asgard in disguise, but the moments before the fake death are real. He did the right thing, and then he immediately resumed scheming, which is actually a fairly accurate portrait of what complicated people do. The theatrical nature of his villainy in the Avengers deserves some attention too. Loki's invasion of Earth is the least competent plan he ever executes, and I think part of that is that he's not actually entirely committed to it. He's been through something traumatic since falling from the Bifrost. Whatever happened in the Void, whatever Thanos put him through, whatever it cost him to arrive in Earth with an army and a mission. The performance of confidence in the Avengers is its most brittle version because he's the most frightened he's ever been. He's not sure he's right anymore. He's not sure he's anything, and kneel before me is a desperate attempt to feel certain again. Steve Rogers reading him correctly. Guys like you, there's always a line they won't cross until they cross it, isn't just a good one-liner. It's an accurate diagnosis, and the fact that Loki attacks him immediately after means it landed. Thor: Ragnarok is the film that figured out what Thor movies actually wanted to be, which is to say, very funny, extremely colourful, and underneath all of that, genuinely sad. The lore of Ragnarok, the actual mythological concept, not just the film title, is worth sitting with. Ragnarok is the prophecy of Asgard's destruction, the end of all things. In the Norse tradition, it's the twilight of the god, an inevitable apocalypse where everything falls. The MCU takes this concept and does something quite interesting with it. Ragnarok isn't something that happens to Asgard. It's something Thor has to choose. The film opens with Thor already imprisoned, dangling in chains in Muspelheim, the realm of fire demons, having a very one-sided conversation with Surtur, the fire giant who is the agent of Ragnarok. Surtur tells Thor that he will place his crown in the eternal flame, Asgard's sacred fire, the source of its power, and that when he does, the destruction will begin. Thor defeats him, takes his crown as a trophy, and goes home feeling quite pleased with himself. He stopped Ragnarok, or so he thinks. The film then goes through several plot movements, discovering Loki's masquerade, finding Odin, discovering Hela, before arriving at the actual point, which is that Ragnarok cannot be prevented, it can only be directed. Thor's eventual realization is that the prophecy says Asgard will be destroyed, not that the Asgardians will die. Asgard isn't the golden city on a rock. Asgard is the people, and so he puts Surtur's crown in the eternal flame. Deliberately, he triggers the very thing he spent the whole film trying to prevent, because it turns out that's the only way to defeat Hela. She's too powerful to kill directly, but Surtur's destruction of Asgard kills her along with everything else. The detail that Hela's power is tied to Asgard itself is easy to miss, but it's important. She grows stronger the closer she gets to the realm. Away from Asgard, she's dangerous but beatable. On Asgard, she's nearly unstoppable. This is why she can't simply be lured somewhere else and defeated. The fight has to happen on her ground, where she's at full power. The only way to win is to remove that ground entirely. Surtur rising from the eternal flame, massive, building-sized, eventually planet-sized, is one of the MCU's more spectacular sequences. And the character beats around it land. Asgardians escaping on the ship that Loki quietly arranged, the Valkyrie fighters charging, Heimdall getting the people out, Thor watching his home burn from space. He loses his home, his father, his sister, his hammer Mjolnir, destroyed by Hela early in the film. She catches it mid-flight and shatters it, which was a genuine moment in 2017. And his eye. Hela gouges it out during their final fight. He gets an eye patch from there forward, which connects him visually to Odin, which is presumably intentional. What he gains is perspective. There's a scene in the film where Odin's spirit essentially tells Thor that he was never special because of the hammer. The hammer was just a tool to focus what was already there. Thor is the god of thunder. The lightning responds to him because he is himself, not because of any object. The moment in the final battle where Thor summons lightning without Mjolnir and just lets it come through him is the payoff to that scene. Hela, despite being the villain, is one of the more interesting antagonists in the Thor films, simply because she's not wrong about everything. She's right that Asgard's history was sanitized. She's right that Odin was complicit in violence he later pretended not to have been part of. Her method, conquest, murder, reclaiming a throne through force, is monstrous. But her critique of Odin's hypocrisy is accurate. The MCU lets the villain land her points before having her defeated, which is good storytelling. The Grandmaster and Sakaar deserve a mention. Sakaar is the planet that sits at the intersection of various wormholes across the universe, which means it collects lost things, debris, ships, people. The Grandmaster, played with delightful commitment by Jeff Goldblum, essentially rules a junk planet through gladiatorial combat and sheer force of personality. It's one of the MCU's stranger settings, and it works because the film leans fully into its weirdness, rather than trying to explain it away. The Hulk being on Sakaar, 2 years as a gladiator champion, Banner suppressed, Hulk dominant, is something the film handles in a fairly compressed way, but which has real implications. Hulk isn't just Banner when he's angry, he's a separate consciousness, with his own preferences and memories, and he's been in control long enough to develop something like a personality. His reluctance to let Banner back is more than just aggression, it's self-preservation. He doesn't want to go back to being the half of himself that is scared of what he becomes. The mid-credits scene of Ragnarok is worth mentioning because it does what good mid-credits scenes do. It reframes the entire film you just watched. The Asgardians are on their ship, heading toward Earth, something like hopeful. And then a massive warship appears ahead of them. Thanos' ship. The threat that's been abstract since 2012 is suddenly very concrete. And the film cuts to black. The Valkyrie, Brunhild, deserves a proper mention because she's one of the more interesting additions to the Thor mythology. She's the last surviving member of Asgard's elite warrior corps, the Valkyria, who were destroyed by Hela in a battle that happened before the events of any of the films. She watched her friends die. She escaped by running, which she's been punishing herself for ever since, drinking heavily on Saka and selling slaves to the Grandmaster, because it's a living, and because living requires something to do. She's not broken exactly. She's anesthetized. She's kept herself functional through disconnection, and she's good at it. What Thor does, inadvertently, mostly, is reconnect her to something she cared about. The fight against Hela becomes personal for her, in a way it can't be avoided. She survived once and carries the guilt of survival. Going back is, in some sense, paying a debt she's owed since that first battle. The way the film handles her arc is refreshingly uncommented on. She doesn't have a dramatic moment of declaration where she decides to rejoin the fight. She just does it. She shows up. That practical, unannounced quality is consistent with her character throughout. Thor's eye loss is worth noting again because of how the films handle it. In earlier MCU entries, injuries to major heroes tend to heal or be resolved by the following scene. Thor loses an eye, and it doesn't come back. He gets a replacement prosthetic at one point, briefly, but Endgame has him in an eye patch again. And 5 years later, Thor is clearly still functioning with one eye. The films treat it as permanent, which gives it a weight that temporary injuries don't carry. There's a visual echo the films clearly intend. Thor with an eye patch looks like Odin. He's become the one-eyed king, not because he chose it, but because the war cost him exactly what it cost his father. That's either poetic or the universe being mechanical about its patterns, depending on your perspective. Either reading works. The Guardians of the Galaxy are, at their core, a collection of people who were lost before they found each other. Not figuratively lost, literally lost. Abandoned, experimented on, enslaved, orphaned, trained as weapons. Each of them, before the first film, was alone in a very specific and very complete way. That's what makes the found family dynamic work, as well as it does. It's not just that they chose each other, it's that choosing each other was the first meaningful choice most of them had ever been allowed to make. Let's go through them one at a time, because each story is worth the time. Peter Quill. Star-Lord Peter was abducted from Earth on the night his mother died. He was 8 years old. He had just been asked to hold her hand as she passed away in hospital, and he ran out of the room because he couldn't do it. He was a child, and he was terrified. When he stepped outside, he was taken by a Ravager ship, carried into space, and raised by criminals. He had a Walkman and a mixtape his mother made him. Those two objects became his entire connection to his origins. He's been called Star-Lord for so long that it's sometimes easy to forget that the person under the jacket is a grieving kid from Missouri who never got to say goodbye to his mum. The Ravager who raised him, Yondu Udonta, is one of the more quietly important characters in the Guardians story. He's presented initially as a threat and an adversary, someone Peter is constantly outrunning. But the second film reveals the actual dynamic. Yondu was hired by Peter's biological father to retrieve Peter and deliver him, realised that the father intended to use Peter as a tool and then discard him, and decided instead to keep Peter in his crew. He raised him badly, with threats and bluster and the general atmosphere of a criminal organisation, but he raised him. "I'm Mary Poppins, y'all," Yondu announces at one point. And it's funny, but it's also the film's shorthand for the fact that this rough, blue-skinned thief with an arrow he controls by whistling is the closest thing Peter has ever had to a good parent. Yondu's death in Guardians Volume 2, giving Peter his spacesuit in the vacuum of space so Peter can survive, is the MCU moment I return to most often when thinking about this franchise. Not because it's the most spectacular, because it's the most precise. Yondu was never good. He was complicated and selfish and ran a criminal enterprise. And he gave up his heir and his life for a boy he'd spent 20 years pretending not to love. "He might have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy," Peter says at the end. And it's a simple distinction, but it cuts right through. Peter's half-celestial nature is worth noting. His biological father is Ego, a celestial, an ancient, cosmos-sized being. Peter inherits some of Ego's ability to manipulate matter and energy. He can briefly hold an infinity stone, bare-handed in the first film, because of this heritage. But when Ego is destroyed, so is the celestial connection. Peter loses that power, returns to being just a human with a gun and a jetpack, which might actually be the better version of him. Thanos attacked Gamora's homeworld and killed half its population, personally, with his own hand. Then he took Gamora and raised her, trained her, made her into the most dangerous assassin in the galaxy. He loved her, in whatever way he was capable of loving something. He called her his favourite daughter. She spent her life trying to escape what he built her to be, and then couldn't entirely escape it, because she was genuinely as capable as he'd made her. Her relationship with Nebula is the emotional core of her story. They are sisters through shared suffering, both trained by Thanos, both used by him, both reshaped by his violence. The detail that every time Nebula lost to Gamora in training, Thanos removed a part of her and replaced it with machinery, as if her losses were defects to be corrected, is one of the more casually disturbing pieces of MCU backstory. By the time we meet Nebula, she's more machine than organic, and she hates Gamora for it, because Gamora was the one who kept winning. The arc of their relationship across the films, from enemies to something that resembles family, is handled well. The conversation they have in Infinity War when they're imprisoned by Thanos is the scene where Nebula stops resenting Gamora and starts understanding her. "All any of you do is be afraid of me," Gamora says of Thanos, and Nebula hears it differently than she once would have. They're the same. They were always the same. Rocket's backstory, left implicit in the first two Guardians films, is given fully in Volume 3, and it's significantly darker than the tone of those earlier films would suggest. He was created by a being called the High Evolutionary, a geneticist with limitless resources, and no ethical framework whatsoever, who experimented on animals to create enhanced, intelligent creatures. Rocket was designated Batch 89, a raccoon, genetically modified, given enhanced intelligence and cybernetic enhancements, raised in captivity. The High Evolutionary recognized immediately that Rocket was exceptional. His intelligence was anomalous even among modified subjects, so he studied him obsessively, and he threatened to harvest Rocket's brain to understand it. In captivity, Rocket formed bonds with 3 other experimental animals: Lila, an otter; Teefs, a walrus; Floor, a bunny. They were his family. They were the first things he'd ever had. He devised an escape plan. When they tried to execute it, the High Evolutionary killed Lila, Teefs and Floor in front of him, as a punishment for the attempt, as a lesson. Rocket survived. He escaped eventually. And he built around himself, across the next years, a persona of cynicism and aggression so complete that you could almost miss the grief underneath it. Almost. The moment in Volume 3 where Rocket, dying, experiences a vision of Lila, who tells him to go back, that he has more to do, and chooses to return to life rather than join his dead friends, is the payoff to the entire character arc. Rocket is not cynical. He's devastated and has been for a very long time. The cynicism is just the shape the devastation takes when it has to function in the world. He ends Volume 3 as the captain of the New Guardians, which is the correct ending for his arc. Not a return to innocence, but a choice to build something, to carry the people who trust him, to keep going. Drax is the most straightforward member of the group in terms of motivation. Ronan killed his wife and daughter. He wants revenge. And the most surprising in terms of where the films take him. He spends most of the first Guardians film being used primarily for comedy derived from his literalness. He cannot understand metaphor, which is actually funnier in context than it sounds in description, and as a direct physical threat. By Volume 3, the film has something unexpected in mind for him. There's a subplot where Drax discovers he's genuinely good with children, specifically with the experimental creatures and children who've been created by the High Evolutionary. He's patient with them, unexpectedly gentle, instinctively protective, and he and Nebula choose at the end of the film to stay behind on Nowhere to raise these children and care for these creatures. It's a lovely turn. The warrior, driven by grief for his family, becomes someone who builds a new family from whatever's available. The revenge arc transforms, very quietly, into a care arc. Groot communicates exclusively with 3 words, "I am Groot," in varying inflections that apparently convey complete sentences to those who've spent time around him. The films use this for comedy and for genuine pathos with equal ease. The moment in the first Guardians film where Groot creates a sphere of bioluminescent flowers around the imprisoned group just because he's thinking of something beautiful is one of those small MCU moments that does more emotional work than most action sequences. Baby Groot, who emerges from a twig at the end of the first film, is implied to be a new entity rather than a restored Groot. The original died. The new one is grown from him, a child rather than a resurrection. The films don't make this explicit, but the creative team has confirmed it, and it does give the tiny sapling in Volume 2 a different quality. He's not recovering from something. He's just himself, new and curious. Nebula. If you trace Nebula's arc across all 3 Guardians films and Endgame, she travels further than any of them. She starts as a fully committed agent of Thanos, competent, ruthless, self-interested. She ends as someone capable of genuine grief, genuine loyalty, and the very specific kind of compassion that comes from understanding exactly what someone else has been through, because you've been through it too. Her role in Endgame is crucial. The 2014 version of her is the fracture point. When her cybernetic systems connect to the present Nebula during the time heist, and she feeds information about the Avengers' plan to 2014 Thanos. The present Nebula has grown past this version of herself, and the moment where she faces her past self is one of those quiet character moments the film handles well. The Guardians as a unit work because none of them chose to be what they are. Rocket didn't choose to be modified, Gamora didn't choose to be trained as a weapon, Peter didn't choose to be abducted. What they chose, what they keep choosing, is each other. And every film in the trilogy is basically a meditation on what it means to choose a family when your original one was taken from you or never properly existed. One detail worth enjoying: they live on Nowhere, the severed head of a dead celestial, repurposed as a market and research station. There's something appropriate about the universe's most unlikely family setting up home inside the strangest object in the galaxy. The Ravagers, as an organisation, are worth a brief mention because they're more than just Peter's criminal background. They're an institution with their own codes. There are dozens of Ravager factions, each led by a captain, each with their own colours and rules. Yondu's faction broke the Ravager code. The one explicit rule appears to be that Ravagers don't traffic children, and that's why they were exiled from the broader organisation. The detail that Yondu's exile from the Ravagers was because of Peter, because of using Peter as part of his operations even though Peter was a child, is a piece of background information that recontextualizes the entire first Guardians film. Yondu wasn't protecting Peter out of pure affection. He was also protecting his own last shred of standing. By Volume 2, though, when the full truth comes out and Yondu chooses the airlock, that distinction has collapsed. Whatever his original motivations, what remained at the end was genuine. The Ravager honor guard at his funeral, dozens of ships releasing coloured exhaust into space as a tribute, is one of those moments where the MCU earns its emotion through patience. You had to spend 2 films understanding what the Ravagers are and what their codes mean for the gesture to land. Mantis is another Guardians member whose story has a particular darkness underneath the quirky presentation. She was raised by Ego specifically as a kind of emotional servant. Her empathic abilities were used by Ego to help him sleep and to manage his own vast internal experience. She doesn't know anything other than service to him. Her social awkwardness isn't just comedic texture, it's the result of having no socialization outside of a single, isolated relationship with an entity that used her as a tool. The Guardians are the first group of peers she's ever had. The Volume 3 resolution for her is one of the quieter and more satisfying ones. She doesn't stay with the Guardians at the end. She leaves to discover herself, to find out who she is when she isn't in service to someone else's needs. She takes a ship and she goes exploring. There's no dramatic arc resolution, just someone who has spent her whole life being used finally having the space to figure out what she actually wants. That's not a villain's defeat or a hero's sacrifice. It's just a person getting the chance to live their own life, finally. I find it genuinely moving. The High Evolutionary, as a villain, works precisely because he doesn't think of himself as a villain at all. He's a scientist, a creator. His experiments on animals, giving them intelligence, consciousness, emotions, community, are presented internally as gifts. He's elevating these creatures. The fact that he then kills them when they disappoint him, or when they threaten to complicate his work, is something he's entirely comfortable with, because in his framework, they exist for his purposes. He made them, he can unmake them. The concept of them having independent worth doesn't register. His reaction when confronted with the idea that Rocket has an interior life he didn't design and can't control is what drives his obsession. Rocket's brain is not what the High Evolutionary built. It's something that emerged from what he built, unpredictably, beyond his intentions. And he cannot tolerate that. He needs to understand it, possess it, harvest it if necessary. The idea that a creation has exceeded its creator is an affront to his entire sense of the world. The second Guardians film does something that the first didn't have time for, which is to go slow enough to let you spend time with each character individually. The first film is mostly momentum, getting the team together, establishing who they are in broad strokes, getting the Power Stone contained before Ronan uses it. The second film splits the team up deliberately and follows each thread separately, which is a structural choice that not every audience responded to warmly, but which I think is right for what the film is trying to do. Yondu's story in Volume 2 is the film's emotional core. He's been exiled from the Ravager community for breaking their code. He carries Kraeglin's quiet pity and his own crew's contempt. He has a fin implant that lets him control the magic arrow with whistles and thoughts, and his crew has removed it. He literally cannot access his greatest weapon, which means he's dependent on Rocket and Baby Groot to get it back. He's diminished in every measurable way, and the film strips away the bluster and the menace, and what's left underneath is someone who has been running from his own feelings for so long that he barely recognizes them anymore. The scene where he tells Peter that he stayed with the Ravagers for 20 years so that Ego wouldn't kill him because he knew what Ego was doing with his children, had been delivering them to their deaths, had been complicit in it and then stopped when it came to Peter and couldn't stop knowing it, is the scene where the film earns everything it later asks of you. Yondu never processed this guilt. He buried it under 20 years of being the meanest thing in the room, and what it cost him is sitting right there on his face. Adam Warlock, who appears fully in Volume 3 as a significant character, having been teased in Volume 2's post-credits, is an interesting case of the MCU taking its time with an introduction. He's one of the most powerful beings in Marvel Comics mythology, essentially a golden-skinned being of immense power and cosmic significance. In Volume 3, he's introduced not at the peak of that power, but as someone who was created very recently, who was supposed to be the High Evolutionary's perfect weapon, but is still essentially a child in terms of experience and judgment. He has the power of a god and the impulse control of a toddler. His arc across the film is simply learning that the people he was sent to destroy are worth more than his mission. It's not complicated. It doesn't need to be. The Guardians trilogy as a whole is worth appreciating as a complete statement. It begins with 5 strangers becoming a family, continues by testing whether that family can survive meeting the things they fled, and ends by acknowledging that families change, that children grow up, that people find new purposes, that the original configuration of a beloved thing doesn't have to be its final form. The Guardians at the end of Volume 3 are not the Guardians of Volume 1. They're something new, and the original 5 are all in different ways exactly where they should be. That's rarer than it sounds. Most franchise endings try to preserve what made something work in the first place. The Guardians trilogy lets its people leave. Since the Guardians keep bumping into Celestials, Nowhere being one, Ego being another, it's worth spending some time on what Celestials actually are, because they're one of those MCU concepts that the films gesture at without fully explaining. Celestials are ancient. The word doesn't quite cover it. They predate civilizations. They may predate some of the physical structures of the universe. In the MCU's cosmology, they are vast, incomprehensible beings, often depicted at planetary scale, their actual forms armoured and star-like. They seeded life across the universe, intervening in the development of planets and species in ways that are still reverberating. The reason they seeded life was, it turns out, not entirely benevolent. The Eternals film, released in 2021, and somewhat divisive in terms of reception, though I think its mythology is more interesting than it gets credit for, explains the mechanism. Celestials reproduce by gestating inside planets. A celestial seed is planted at a planet's core. It requires the development of intelligent life on that planet to provide the energy needed for the celestial to eventually emerge. Once there's enough intelligent life, enough energy, the celestial hatches, destroying the planet and all life on it in the process. The Eternals were created by a celestial called Arishem, robotic beings with various powers, sent to multiple planets across millions of years to protect developing civilizations from creatures called deviants, which would otherwise kill the intelligent life needed to fuel the Celestials' growth. The Eternals are, in essence, farmers. They protect the livestock that will eventually be consumed to birth their creator. They don't know this. Their memories are wiped between assignments. They believe they're protectors. The realization of their true purpose and the question of what to do with that realization is what the film is actually about. The celestial gestating inside Earth is Tiamut. When the Eternals discover what's happening, some of them choose to stop Tiamut's emergence, even though doing so kills a god. Others argue that the Celestial's birth is necessary for the greater good of the universe. It's a genuine ethical dilemma, and the film doesn't completely resolve it, which I think is the right choice. Tiamut is stopped mid-emergence. His hand is still sticking out of the Indian Ocean, turned to stone. In whatever MCU films follow the Eternals, it's one of those details that should probably have more consequences than it does. Ego, the living planet, Groot's celestial, in a manner of speaking, is the opposite of Tiamut in some ways. He's fully formed, active, has been growing and extending himself across the universe for millions of years. His planet is literally his body. The structures on it are his constructs. The humanoid form he presents to Peter and the others is a projection, a convenient shape for interaction. He's been planting seeds of himself across the universe, looking for another celestial to combine his power with, because alone he can spread only so far. He fathered thousands of children across thousands of worlds, looking for one who inherited the celestial gene. Peter is the one he finds. The detail that Ego killed all his other children when they turned out not to have the gene and buried them in the caverns beneath his surface is the reveal that converts him from a complicated father figure into something much simpler and more frightening. He's been doing this for millennia. The children he killed weren't failures to him. They were experiments. The Eternals, as individual characters, are worth briefly touching on. Druig is the one who always bothers me to think about, in a productive way. His power is mind control. He can mentally influence large groups of people. At one point, during a historical massacre, he simply takes control of everyone, stops the violence, forces peace, and then he leaves, because the Eternals' directive is not to interfere with human conflict, and he can't keep doing it without violating his purpose. He withdraws to a remote part of the Amazon and lives there with a community that he guides, not controlling them exactly, but keeping them safe through subtle influence. It's a choice he describes as the best compromise he can find. But the film is honest about the fact that it's also a choice to not intervene in centuries of human suffering when he could have. He's not wrong that there are limits to what any one person can do. He's also not entirely comfortable with those limits. Phastos is another one, the Eternal who influenced human technological development, who gave humanity metallurgy and agriculture and other advances, who was present at Hiroshima, who watched what was done with the technology he'd helped develop and was devastated by it. He withdrew from humanity afterward. By the time the film catches up with him, he's living quietly with a husband and a son, completely disconnected from the world he once tried to help. There's a version of the Eternal story that's about the weight of responsibility over impossible timescales, what it costs to care about something for millions of years and watch it keep going wrong. The film doesn't fully commit to that version, but it's there, underneath, and it's one of the things I find interesting about it. Ikaris deserves specific attention because he's the most complicated figure in the film's moral landscape. He knows the truth about the emergence, about Tiamut, about what the Eternals are actually for, and he chose to keep it from the others and to continue the mission anyway. Not out of blind obedience, he chose it. He made a deliberate calculation that the Celestials' plan mattered more than the lives of every human on Earth, and he committed to that position through thousands of years of relationships and love and loyalty, and he maintained it even when those relationships made the calculation increasingly costly. His relationship with Cersei, whom he loves genuinely, across millennia, and his decision to side with Arishem against her is the film's primary tragedy. He's not a villain, in the traditional sense. He's someone who made a terrible choice in complete sincerity and couldn't find a way back from it. His ending, flying into the sun, is one of those MCU moments that's treated quietly and without dramatic fanfare. He doesn't fight to the end. He doesn't appeal his decision. He just goes. The sun is where he goes because it's the only thing he ever compared to his own power, and it's where his pride sends him when that pride has nowhere left to go. Arishem himself, the celestial who created the Eternals and who arrives at the end of the film to judge humanity for stopping the emergence, is an interesting problem for the MCU going forward. He takes Cersei, Kingo, and Phastos. He says he'll review their memories and decide whether humanity is worth preserving. This is a dangling thread that hasn't been resolved in a significant MCU project since. A literal god with a specific grudge against the planet and 3 cosmic-powered beings in custody is a problem the MCU has been patient about addressing. The Deviants are worth mentioning here too, briefly. They were the Eternals' original enemies, creatures that attacked the developing civilizations the Eternals were protecting. They were supposed to be hunted to extinction. But in Eternals we meet Crow, a deviant who has developed intelligence and speech by absorbing power from Eternals he's killed. He is, it turns out, as much a product of celestial experimentation as the Eternals themselves. Just one that went in a direction Arishem didn't intend. Like Rocket's brain. An unexpected emergence from a designed process. The Celestials, then, are defined by their relationship to unexpected outcomes. They design systems to produce specific results, and things keep evolving past what they designed for. Maybe that's what life does. Maybe the Celestials, for all their incomprehensible power, are just as surprised by consciousness as anyone else. Beneath the surface of the MCU, beneath the alien invasions and the superhero teams and the political conflicts, there is another layer entirely. A layer of sorcerers and sanctums and dimensional barriers, working quietly to keep things from being much, much worse. Kamataj is a sanctuary in Kathmandu, Nepal. Hidden in plain sight technically, though it requires either an invitation or the kind of desperate need that apparently functions as a navigation system, because the people who find it are almost always people who had no other options. Stephen Strange finds it after exhausting every conventional medical option for his damaged hands. He's lost everything that defined him: his surgical career, his identity, his sense of purpose. And Kamataj is, as far as he's concerned, a last resort. The Ancient One who greets him there is nothing like what he expected. She's calm and small, and has no interest in healing his hands. What she offers instead is something Strange initially doesn't want. The truth about the nature of reality. She tears his astral body from his physical form and throws him through multiple dimensions simultaneously. The mirror dimension, the astral plane, somewhere that seems to be the quantum realm, several other places with no names he has references for, and then deposits him back in his body in the Himalayan snow. It's one of the more effective "your whole worldview is wrong" sequences in the MCU, partly because Strange's whole worldview genuinely is wrong in a specific way. He's a man who has reduced everything to what can be measured and replicated. The Ancient One shows him that he's been operating with a fundamental misunderstanding of how reality works, and that his arrogance, the same arrogance that made him a brilliant surgeon, has also made him completely blind to dimensions of existence that have always been there. The Ancient One's secret, revealed by Mordo and accepted by Strange before her death, is that she has been drawing power from the dark dimension, the realm of Dormammu, to sustain her life and continue protecting Earth. This violates every principle she taught. She broke the rule against using dark dimension power, because without it, she would have died centuries ago, and Earth would have had no Sorcerer Supreme. It's the kind of moral compromise that doesn't have a clean resolution. Was she wrong? She protected the Earth for an extraordinarily long time. Did the means corrupt the end? Probably somewhat. The films don't settle it, which is the right choice. Mordo, who is her most devoted follower, views it as an unforgivable betrayal and becomes a villain in consequence. Strange, who is more comfortable with moral ambiguity, accepts her explanation and carries on. The three sanctums, New York, London, Hong Kong, function as mystical anchors. They protect Earth from dimensional invasion. Sorcerers actually die to maintain them, which is a level of ongoing sacrifice that the films mention in passing and then move on from, but which is worth pausing on. There are people who give their lives to keep the barriers up. Nobody knows their names. The world is never in any danger. And that's only true because of them. Strange's training involves learning the sling ring, a device that allows sorcerers to open portals between locations, and the use of the Eye of Agamotto, which contains the Time Stone. He learns to use the Time Stone fairly early, which is notable, because the Ancient One apparently trusted him with it more quickly than she should have. Or perhaps she'd already looked far enough forward to know he'd need it. The way Strange uses the Time Stone against Dormammu is one of the more intellectually satisfying sequences in the MCU. Dormammu is an entity of infinite power and appetite, but he exists outside of time. Strange creates a time loop around the area where Dormammu is invading, trapping the entity in the same moment forever. The same defeat, the same attempt, the same second of contact, repeating infinitely. He offers Dormammu a bargain. Leave Earth and take Caecilius, and Strange will release the loop. Dormammu, who has presumably never been trapped in time before, agrees. It's not strength that wins that confrontation. It's a kind of stubborn ingenuity. Strange is willing to die an infinite number of times, in an infinite number of ways. Togdari, he does die, repeatedly, in the loop, to hold the bargaining position. That willingness is itself a form of power. The detail in Infinity War, where Strange looks through every possible future before the battle on Titan, is the payoff to his entire character arc up to that point. He's learned to use the stone not for personal advantage, but for the specific kind of strategic clarity that requires seeing the entire picture before moving. And what he sees tells him that the only winning scenario involves Tony surviving, which requires surrendering the stone, which requires the snap happening, which requires 5 years of loss. He gives Thanos the stone. He watches Tony for just a moment before he turns to dust, a look that is not defeat if you're paying attention. It's confirmation. Wong, Strange's eventual Sorcerer Supreme and ongoing ally, deserves more credit than he typically gets in discussions of the MCU. He's the institutional memory of Kamar-Taj. He's the one who keeps things running when Strange is off doing something reckless. He appears throughout the later films at exactly the right moments, usually with weapons and zero interest in explaining himself, which is the correct energy for any good supporting character. Mordo's arc is one the MCU has been very patient with, possibly too patient. He starts in Doctor Strange as the Ancient One's most devoted follower, a man whose entire worldview is built on the strictness of magical law. No bending rules, no drawing from forbidden power. The system is the system because the system works. The reveal that the Ancient One has been drawing from the dark dimension, the exact thing Mordo's entire philosophy forbids, shatters him. He leaves. He tells Strange, the bill comes due, always. In a mid-credits scene at the end of Doctor Strange, we see Mordo afterward, visiting a former sorcerer whose magical abilities he has stripped away. There are too many sorcerers, he says. He's become a villain who hunts magic users, not out of cruelty, but out of a conviction that the problem with the world is the proliferation of people who use power they shouldn't have. He's appeared very briefly since, and what happens with him eventually is one of those MCU loose threads I find myself genuinely curious about. His philosophy isn't incoherent. There's a version of his argument that power has costs and people who use it are too cavalier about what those costs are. That isn't wrong. The problem is what he does with the conclusion. The mirror dimension is another piece of MCU magical infrastructure worth a moment's appreciation. It's a parallel plane of reality that sorcerers can fold around a space. containing magical battles without affecting the physical world. Structures in the mirror dimension, buildings, streets, geometry, can be manipulated and moved, creating the folding city visual that the first Doctor Strange film used as its signature aesthetic. It's not just a visual effect, it's a tactical tool. Strange using it to contain Caecilius's followers during the fight in London is the sort of detail that rewards attention. He's not just fighting, he's managing the fight so that ordinary people on the street outside don't experience any of it. The protection is built into the technique. The sanctum in New York, the one Strange eventually takes over as his home, sits in Greenwich Village, and it's full of dangerous artifacts and interdimensional objects that Strange gradually learns to manage. The Cloak of Levitation, which chooses Strange rather than being chosen by him and has something like a personality, it wipes tears from his face at one point, entirely uninstructed, is one of those small MCU touches that adds texture without demanding attention. The magical world has its own logic, and not all of it is solemn. The multiverse itself, the dimension of dimensions, the space between all possible realities, is something Strange has been navigating since his earliest training. The Ancient One showed him a glimpse of it in that first disorienting experience. What he's gradually learned across the films is that the multiverse isn't a threat to be managed, so much as a fact to be understood. Every choice branches it further. Every sacrifice closes a path. The sorcerers aren't protecting one reality. They're managing a relationship between infinite realities, keeping the traffic between them from becoming catastrophic. The third eye that appears on Strange's forehead after Multiverse of Madness, the result of his repeated use of the Darkhold, is one of those MCU details that deserves more attention than it's received. It's a mystical marking of corruption, or perhaps of expanded perception. The films are deliberately ambiguous about which. The Darkhold changes whoever uses it. Strange used it to dreamwalk into a dead variant of himself, which is about as dark as sorcery gets, and he came back changed. The eye opened. It stays open. He doesn't seem alarmed by it. He covers it when necessary, but he doesn't seem to be seeking a cure, which is either equanimity in the face of magical consequence, or the beginning of something the MCU hasn't fully addressed yet. Either reading is interesting. Strange has always been the character most willing to accept that using power has costs that can't always be reversed. The cracked hands, the time he spent watching himself die across every possible simulation, and now this. He adds it to the accounting and moves on. What Strange represents in the MCU going forward is genuinely open. The Infinity Stones are gone. The multiverse is fractured. The TVA has been restructured. The old frameworks for managing cosmic threats have largely dissolved. And Strange is the person positioned most centrally in the architecture of what remains, holding the sanctum, studying the new threats, already 3 moves ahead of most crises by the time they become apparent to everyone else. Whatever the MCU's next decade needs from its sorcerers, it will presumably need a lot of it. Peter Parker is 16 when we first meet him in the MCU. Not the origin story Peter, but the one who is already Spider-Man, who has been doing this for a few months, who films himself on a phone as Tony Stark's car pulls up outside his flat in Queens. He's excited, he's terrified, he cannot stop talking. The MCU's specific contribution to Spider-Man as a character is placing him in a world that is too large for him and watching him grow into it. Other adaptations focus on the origin, the spider, the loss of Uncle Ben, the lesson about power and responsibility. This version skips the origin, shown only in a rapid-fire summary during a conversation with Tony in Civil War, and drops you into the middle of a character who already knows the lesson, at least intellectually, but hasn't yet understood the cost of it. The first Homecoming film is really about the gap between knowing a principle and living it. Peter knows he should be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He's been told this by Tony, the adult he respects most, but he doesn't actually believe that small-scale heroism is enough. He wants to be an Avenger. He wants to matter on the biggest possible scale. The Vulture investigation is his attempt to prove he deserves more than what he's been given. And Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, is one of the more interesting antagonists in the Spider-Man MCU films, precisely because his motivation is so understandable. He was a salvage contractor. After the Battle of New York in the Avengers left alien debris across the city, his company was hired to clean it up. Then the government stepped in and gave the contract to Tony Stark's Department of Damage Control, and Toomes' business was essentially destroyed overnight. He broke the law because the law didn't leave him a viable alternative. His criminal enterprise is built on alien technology and resentment, and the resentment, at least, is rooted in something real. The scene where he figures out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, when he's picking Liz up for homecoming and looks at Peter and just knows, is quietly brilliant. He doesn't say anything in front of Liz. He waits until they're in the car, and then he explains, in a very calm voice, exactly what he'll do if Peter gets in his way. It's the MCU equivalent of a parent-teacher conference gone horribly wrong. Far From Home follows Peter through Europe in the aftermath of Endgame, and what it's really about is the impossibility of being a teenager who has watched his father figure die and is now being handed the dead man's technology and told he's the next one. Edith, the glasses Tony left him, gives Peter access to a satellite network and an arsenal of drones. He's not equipped for that. He knows he's not equipped for that. And Quentin Beck, presenting himself as the experienced adult who is, makes the offer seem reasonable. Beck is the film's most interesting piece of characterization. He's a man who worked for Tony Stark, was dismissed. His invention, an augmented reality system called BARF, was renamed by Tony to something humiliating at a company presentation, and developed a character that is entirely constructed from performance. Everything about him as Mysterio is an illusion. The heroism, the origin story from another dimension, the elemental threats, all staged, all fabricated. He's a fraud so committed to the performance that he's essentially become the character he invented. The scene where Beck's illusions trap Peter psychologically, confusing his senses, showing him threats that aren't real, eventually getting him hit by a train, is one of the more genuinely affecting action sequences in the trilogy. It's not physically spectacular, it's disorienting and frightening in the way that a panic attack is frightening. The loss of certainty about what's real. The identity reveal at the end of Far From Home. Beck dying releases footage framing Peter for the attacks and exposing him as Spider-Man sets up No Way Home as a direct consequence. No Way Home is essentially a meditation on the cost of connection. Peter asks Doctor Strange to cast a spell making everyone forget he's Spider-Man. The spell goes wrong because Peter keeps interrupting it. He wants his friends to remember, his aunt to remember, his girlfriend. He can't commit to erasure because he can't commit to losing them. The interrupted spell fractures reality and pulls in visitors from other universes. The three Spider-Men meeting each other is played with genuine warmth. They're the same person at different points of the same arc. Peter 1, Tom Holland, hasn't lost his guiding adult yet. Peter 2, Andrew Garfield, has lost his Uncle Ben. Peter 3, Tobey Maguire, has lost almost everyone. They recognise each other. The conversation about loss is the scene that makes the film work. Three versions of the same grief, different ages, comparing notes. Andrew Garfield's Peter catching MJ when she falls from the Statue of Liberty scaffold. Catching the person he couldn't catch the first time. When Gwen Stacy fell is the moment. It's earned almost entirely by things that happened in films from a different studio a decade earlier, and it still lands completely. That's an unusual achievement. Peter choosing, at the end, to have Strange erase everyone's memory of him, not just of Spider-Man, but of Peter Parker entirely, is the full cost of the principle he's been circling around since the first film. With great power comes great responsibility. The responsibility, fully accepted, means protecting people even from himself. even when it means losing everything. The final scene. A small apartment, a homemade suit sewn from scratch, no Stark technology, no network, just a kid from Queens who decides to keep going. That version of Peter Parker, alone and anonymous, and still choosing to be Spider-Man, is the character finally becoming what he was always supposed to be. There's a version of Peter's story that's easy to miss amid the spectacle, which is that almost every significant loss he suffers is connected to his inability to ask for help in time. Ben died because Peter didn't act when he could. Tony dies partly because the plan required him to. May dies because the Goblin tracked Peter to her. He's surrounded by people who love him: Ned, MJ, May, Happy Hogan, the various versions of himself, and he consistently protects them by pulling away rather than by letting them in. The three Spider-Men conversation in No Way Home addresses this directly. Peter 3 talks about withdrawing after Gwen, becoming more withdrawn, more angry. Peter 2 is in the middle of that process, and the film asks the three of them to do something specific: work together, be vulnerable with each other, help with the cures together rather than alone. It's not presented as a grand philosophical statement. It's just three people who've been through similar things deciding to not be alone for one night. That's the film's actual argument. Ned leads, Peter's best friend, who discovers Peter is Spider-Man and immediately starts calling himself the guy in the chair, is one of the MCU's most underrated supporting characters because the films use him so well. He doesn't become a burden or a liability. He's genuinely helpful, practically and emotionally. When Peter is at his lowest in No Way Home, after May's death, when everyone he knows has forgotten him, Ned is the first person he goes to see. And Ned doesn't remember him, but Ned is still, in every other way, exactly the kind of person he would have been if he did. He's still kind. He's still warm. He's still the person Peter needed. The detail in No Way Home, where Ned discovers he can open sling rings, the same portal Strange uses, and starts accidentally summoning Spider-Men from other universes when he's trying to summon his specific Peter, is the kind of plot development that only works if you've established the character as someone you genuinely like spending time with. It's funny. It also moves the story, and it gives Ned a moment of genuine agency in a film where the emotional weight is otherwise almost entirely on Peter. May Parker, throughout the Homecoming trilogy, is handled with more care than the character sometimes gets in other adaptations. She finds out Peter is Spider-Man between Homecoming and Infinity War, apparently, and her reaction is never shown, just referenced. By the time of Far From Home, she's supportive and practical about it. By No Way Home, she's actively involved, running a shelter for displaced people with Happy Hogan, and her death is not a fridging exactly. Her last words are the moral centerpiece of the entire trilogy. She tells Peter in the moments before she dies that he was right to try to save the villains rather than exile them, that it was worth it even if this is the cost. With great power comes great responsibility, is what she says, and then she's gone. It's the right line at the right moment. The MCU saved it until it could do the most damage. I don't think that's cynical. I think that's understanding how meaning accumulates. Thanos works as a villain and has worked better than almost any other MCU antagonist because he believes he's right, not in the way that all villains believe they're right, the reflexive conviction that one's own goals are justifiable. Thanos' belief is elaborated, it has premises and logic. It arrives from somewhere specific, and within its own framework, it holds together. He's from Titan, a planet that, in his telling, was thriving and overpopulated and dying, consuming its resources faster than it could replenish them, heading toward extinction. He proposed a solution, a random culling of exactly half the population. Random, so no bias, no selection, half. So the remaining population had a chance of survival. He was rejected, he was called a madman. And then he says, Titan died. The film is deliberately vague about whether his diagnosis was correct and whether his solution would have actually worked. You never see Titan thriving. You only see it as a dead world, and only through Thanos' account. He may be right about the resource problem. He's almost certainly wrong about the solution. But from inside his experience, watching the world he loved die the way he predicted it would, his conviction calcifies into certainty. So he decides to do for the universe what he failed to do for Titan. Collect the Infinity Stones, the only force capable of doing it instantly, painlessly, universally, and use them to remove exactly half of all life. Random. No exceptions. A mercy in his mind. The casting of Thanos as genuinely sorrowful in Infinity War. The way the film shows him weeping before he kills Gamora. The way he sits watching a sunrise after the snap is the choice that makes him function as a character rather than just a threat. He's not enjoying this. He's doing what he believes is necessary. That's significantly more disturbing than a villain who simply wants power or destruction. He's done what he set out to do. He goes to his garden. The Infinity Gauntlet is destroyed by the process. The stones are burned out and cracked. When the Avengers find Thanos at the beginning of Endgame and Thor beheads him, they discover the stones have been used to destroy themselves. There is no undoing it. The gauntlet is ruined. Thanos is dead, and half the universe is still gone. That's the end of Phase 3, really. A villain won completely, without ambiguity. The heroes failed. The lesson, for once, didn't arrive in time. The 5-year time jump in Endgame covers what happens after that, and we'll talk about those years in more detail soon. But the version of Thanos who arrives through the quantum tunnel in 2023, the 2014 version, who has learned from the future Nebula what happened to his older self, is importantly different from the one in Infinity War. The 2014 Thanos learns that his plan worked, was reversed, and that people are going to try to undo it again. His response is to abandon the philosophy entirely. He decides instead to destroy everything and rebuild it from scratch. Not a mercy killing, a punishment. Gratitude, he says, would be too much to ask of the survivors. He'll simply start over without them. That version is simpler and more purely monstrous, and I think that's intentional. The complexity of Infinity War's Thanos, the genuine tragedy of his conviction, is stripped away in Endgame to leave something that can be defeated without ambiguity. You can mourn the loss of the tragic version while still understanding why the film needed the straightforwardly evil one. I am inevitable, he says, with the empty gauntlet, and nothing happens. And Tony Stark says, and I am Iron Man, with the stones transferred to his suit. The callback to 2008, to the press conference where Tony first said those words and upended the entire model of what a superhero was, it is the MCU's thank you note to itself. It closes the loop. One aspect of Thanos' character that I don't think gets enough attention is his relationship with his general, Ebony Maw. Maw is presented as the most verbally sophisticated of the Black Order. The others are primarily physical threats, but Maw is an orator, a persuader, someone who deals in rhetoric. His speech to the people of New York when the ship arrives in Infinity War, "Hear me and rejoice. You are about to die at the hands of the children of Thanos. Be thankful that your meaningless lives are now contributing to the balance," is performed with complete sincerity. He genuinely believes it. The children of Thanos, Maw, Proxima Midnight, Corvus Glaive, Cull Obsidian, are called his children. And whatever that means to Thanos, they seem to reciprocate it in kind. They fight for him not as mercenaries, but as believers. This is different from Gamora and Nebula, who were raised under duress and have complicated, difficult relationships with their role in his organization. The Black Order have been shaped into true believers. That's arguably worse. The detail that Thanos weeps before throwing Gamora from the Vormir cliff is the film's most deliberate moral complication. He weeps not because he doesn't want to do it, but because he does want to do it, because he knows she's truly the thing he loves most, and the stone requires that he give it up. The sacrifice is real, the grief is real, and he does it anyway. That combination, genuine love, genuine grief, genuine action in service of a monstrous cause, is what makes him work as a villain rather than just as a threat. Captain America's response to Thanos in the Wakanda battle, when Thanos arrives personally and Steve Rogers plants his feet and just tries to hold him back, physically, with his hands on the gauntlet, is one of those moments where the MCU understands its own characters perfectly. Steve can't stop Thanos. He knows he can't stop Thanos. He does it anyway, because he is constitutionally incapable of not trying. Thanos looks genuinely surprised, briefly, before he pushes through. That surprise means something. It means that, in all of the futures Strange examined, Steve Rogers trying to physically hold back a being of infinite power was probably not a common variable. The snap itself is handled with an extraordinary restraint that I don't think gets acknowledged enough. The film's built to this moment across 10 years. The moment where Thanos closes his fist and half of all life ends. And it doesn't look like anything. There's no explosion, there's no visual catastrophe. Thanos' hand closes, the gauntlet cracks and chars, and then one by one people just stop being there. Peter Parker dissolves in Tony's arms, apologizing. Strange disappears without a word. Drax turns to stone dust between one breath and the next. Across the battlefield, and across the galaxy, the same thing happens, quietly, at the speed of a thought. The creative decision to show it from the ground level, through individual characters, one at a time, each getting their moment rather than a wide shot of mass death, is what makes it land. You're not watching statistics, you're watching specific people, and the specific person who is most devastating is Peter Parker, because he's the youngest and because he can feel it coming. His enhanced senses presumably let him feel what's happening to his cells before it's complete. I don't want to go, he tells Tony, and then he's gone. And Tony is left in the ash. There's a detail in how Tony holds Peter afterward, just sits there in the rubble holding the space where Peter was. That is the most honest shot in the entire film. It's not dramatic. Tony doesn't scream. He just sits with it for a moment. Then he starts trying to figure out what comes next. That's Tony Stark to his core. The grief is real, and he's already working. The 5 years between the snap and its reversal in Endgame are covered in the films in about 10 minutes of screen time. A title card, a few establishing shots, some character updates. Then it's over, and the story moves on. But across the MCU's shows and the later films, those 5 years keep coming back up, because they weren't empty. They were 5 years of a world radically altered, trying to adapt. And what that adaptation looked like is one of the more interesting, untold parts of this universe. Think about the immediate aftermath. Half of all life, instantly. Planes without pilots falling from the sky. Hospitals suddenly half-staffed, with half their patients gone. Emergency services overwhelmed. Families arriving home to find half the people there, and the other half simply ash. Children orphaned instantaneously. Leaders of countries gone mid-sentence. The chaos of the first days is never shown directly in any MCU project, but it's implied everywhere, and it shapes everything that comes after it. The world that exists in Endgame, 5 years later, has adapted. Not well exactly, but adapted. People have built lives around the absence. Grief support groups. Steve Rogers runs one in Endgame's early scenes. New social structures, new economies, new politics. The blip, which is the in-universe term for both the disappearance and the return, creates two distinct traumas. The first is the loss itself. The second is the return. When Bruce Banner snaps everyone back in Endgame, the returning people appear where they were when they vanished. Which sounds simple until you realise some of them were on planes, some were in the middle of roads, some were in buildings that have since been demolished, some were in relationships that the people who remained in the world had moved forward from. Some were children returning to parents who have aged 5 years. Some were parents returning to children who have grown up without them. Far From Home handles this with what I can only describe as strategic comedy. Peter's class is a mess. Some of them were blipped, some weren't. A student named Flash was blipped, but his parents weren't, and came home to a house he didn't recognise with people he'd missed. Peter's aunt, May, was blipped. Happy Hogan was not. The school has to figure out what grade the blipped students are in, because they didn't miss 5 years. They missed nothing. They were just gone and then back. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier is more serious about it. The Global Repatriation Council is trying to manage the return of millions of people to countries that changed while they were gone. New settlements formed in the empty spaces during the 5 years. Communities of people who built lives in areas that were suddenly available, made homes, had children. Those people now have to be displaced when the blips return. The Flag Smashers, the antagonists of that show, are people who preferred the world during the 5 years. The world with fewer borders, less bureaucracy, more community by necessity. They're not wrong that something was lost when everyone came back. One detail worth noting, Vision died before the snap. Thanos killed him directly, removing the Mind Stone from his forehead, killing him twice, once by Wanda, who destroyed the stone to prevent Thanos from getting it, and once when Thanos used the Time Stone to reverse her action and take the stone anyway. Vision was not blipped, he was simply gone. When everyone returned in Endgame, Vision didn't. That distinction matters enormously for Wanda's story, which we'll get to, but it's worth planting here. The blip had edges, and Vision was on the wrong side of one of them. The thing I find most interesting about the 5 years is what they reveal about human adaptability. The world kept going. People didn't stop. They grieved, and then they built around the grief. Monuments were erected, policies were rewritten, history was revised to account for a 5-year gap. And then everyone came back, and the world had to adapt again, this time to the return of the lost, which turned out to be almost as complicated as the loss itself. Thor's specific experience during the 5 years is worth its own moment. He kills Thanos at the beginning of Endgame, with immediacy and finality, a beheading, no dramatic confrontation, and then discovers it achieved nothing. Thanos already destroyed the stones. The act of vengeance he'd been defining himself around, since the snap turned out to be the most hollow possible victory. And then there's a 5-year gap before we see him next. And in that gap, he is withdrawn entirely. He's in New Asgard, a coastal town in Norway, where the surviving Asgardians have settled. And he is not well. He's drinking heavily. He hasn't left the house in what seems like a very long time. He's surrounded by Korg and Mick, who play video games with him and seem to genuinely love him, and he's let everything that made him Thor, the responsibility, the leadership, the physicality, slide away. What's left is someone trying very hard to be invisible. The film plays some of this for comedy and some of it with genuine empathy, and I think it threads that needle more successfully than it's given credit for. Thor's depression, because that's what it is, even if the word isn't used to say, is treated as real. His self-disgust is real. The moment when he summons Mjolnir, which Steve later returned to the timeline, so it's back in this point in time, and it comes to his hand, and he cries, not with joy but with relief. I'm still worthy is one of the more quietly devastating moments in Endgame. He didn't stop being worthy, he just stopped being sure of it. Natasha's 5 years are spent essentially running what's left of the Avengers, maintaining a global network, overseeing missions, coordinating whatever can be coordinated in a universe that's half gone. She doesn't have a home, she has a workspace. The Avengers compound is where she stays because it's where the work is, and the work is the only thing keeping her functional. When Scott Lang shows up with his time travel idea, she's the one who moves on it immediately, without hesitation. Not because she's reckless, because she's been waiting 5 years for something to move toward. Steve's support group is a detail that gets mentioned briefly in Endgame, but never shown properly, and I wish it had more space. The idea of Steve Rogers, this man from the 1940s, a super soldier, arguably the most capable fighter on Earth, sitting in a church basement, helping ordinary people process impossible grief, is exactly right for his character. He's not processing his own grief. He's helping other people with theirs, which is probably the healthiest and most honest thing he does in the entire film, and also the thing that's keeping his own grief at bay. WandaVision is the project in the MCU that I think about most often because it does something genuinely unusual. It uses the structural language of television, specifically sitcom television, to depict the internal experience of grief. Wanda Maximoff has lost her parents, killed in a Sokovia bombing when she was a child, her brother Pietro, killed in Age of Ultron, and Vision, killed by Thanos twice, neither death erasable. She had no body to bury. After Endgame, when she goes to the town of Westview, New Jersey, where Vision had apparently bought them a house where they'd planned to settle, she finds an empty plot of land and a deed. That's all. What she does next isn't a choice exactly. It's more like a collapse with creative consequences. She generates a reality around herself, the Hex, a hexagonal energy field that encompasses the entire town, and inside it, she constructs a life. Vision is there, alive, the reality's rules simply including his existence as a fact. They are husband and wife. They have neighbours. They have problems that resolve themselves. They have a television laugh track. The sitcom conceit is the piece of WandaVision that's easiest to misread as a gimmick. It isn't. The choice of sitcom as the format for Wanda's grief is psychologically precise. Sitcoms are the most controlled, most comforting narrative format in existence. The problems are contained. The episodes end happily. The families argue and then reconcile. Nothing is irreversible. It's a world in which suffering has a shape, and a duration, and a resolution. The series moves through sitcom eras as it progresses. 50s black and white, 60s bright colours, 70s earthier tones, 80s excess, 90s live studio audience, 2000s mockumentary, and each era represents a different layer of Wanda's retreat. The longer she's been in the Hex, the more elaborate and recent the reality becomes. She's not just recreating a fictional world, she's moving through it. Vision, inside the Hex, doesn't know what he is. He has memories he can't fully account for. He notices the edges of the world, the way certain residents repeat themselves, the way certain directions seem to resist approach. He starts asking questions. The relationship between his growing suspicion and Wanda's determination to hold the reality together is where the show's real tension lives. Their children, Billy and Tommy, are conjured into existence by Wanda's chaos magic. Created from nothing, or perhaps from everything, the lore around them gets complicated in later projects. They're real within the Hex, real enough to know, instinctively, that something is wrong. "Mom," Billy says at one point, "what's wrong with the people here?" He's sensing the suppression of the actual Westview residents, people who exist inside the Hex, but are being overwritten by the roles Wanda's reality assigns them. A woman who was a real estate agent becomes the cheerful neighbour. A man who ran the local shop becomes the town comedy relief. All of them aware, somewhere underneath, of what's happening. Trapped. Agatha Harkness is the show's nominal villain, though that framing gets complicated. She's a witch who discovered the Hex and recognised the chaos magic for what it was, power she wanted. She's been manipulating events inside the Hex, pushing Wanda towards certain emotional moments to draw out more power. The reveal, played in a catchy song, one of the show's more audacious choices, is satisfying precisely because Agatha was hiding in plain sight. The post-credits scene, Wanda in a cabin, her physical form making tea while her astral form studies the Darkhold, a book of dark magic. And you can hear, very faintly, Billy and Tommy calling for her. Not nearby, from somewhere else, from somewhere in the multiverse. That detail becomes the foundation of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where Wanda's grief has fully curdled into obsession. She has encountered the Darkhold, which corrupts anyone who uses it, and she is fixed entirely on reaching her children in another universe. The character, who was sympathetic throughout WandaVision, becomes in Multiverse of Madness the film's primary threat. The sympathy isn't entirely withdrawn. You can still trace the line from grieving mother to this, but the corruption is real. Her final act in that film is to destroy every copy of the Darkhold across all universes simultaneously, destroying herself in the process. Whether she died or found another way out is deliberately unclear. The thing WandaVision gets right that very few superhero projects get right is that it takes grief seriously as a subject, not as backstory, not as motivation, as an ongoing experience that has its own logic and its own distortions. Wanda's hex is not an act of malice. It's an act of love that has run out of appropriate objects and is consuming everything around it. Monica Rambeau, the daughter of Maria Rambeau, who we met as a child in Captain Marvel, is the series' anchor to the outside world. She's a sword agent, newly returned from the blip, trying to understand what's happening in Westview. Her relationship with Wanda across the series is careful and evolving. She goes in, she gets expelled, she goes in again, because she's that kind of person. And somewhere in the middle of going through the hex's barrier repeatedly, something changes in her. The energy of the hex rewrites something in her cells, and she emerges with powers she didn't have before. The series is Monica's origin story in the background of Wanda's breakdown. By the end, she can see energy spectra invisible to normal human eyes and, it's implied, manipulate light. Her mid-credits scene, being brought to a spaceship by a Skrull, told that someone in space wants to meet her, sets up her eventual role in the wider MCU. She's a genuinely interesting character, and the series uses her well. The Westview residents suppressed inside the hex are one of the more disturbing, ongoing details of the series. They're aware, underneath the roles Wanda's reality has assigned them, they're fully conscious, experiencing their own imprisonment, unable to act against it, forced to smile and play their parts. One resident, when she manages to break through briefly, delivers a monologue of genuine horror. She's in our heads. I feel her all the time. The tragedy of the hex is not just what it does to Wanda. It's what it does to a whole town of people who had nothing to do with any of it. The Vision within the hex is not the original Vision in any complete sense. He's a construct assembled from Wanda's memory and chaos magic. He doesn't know this. The series gives him a full interiority, complete with doubt and curiosity and love. There's a version of the ethics of that which is very dark. Wanda has created an entity who believes he is a person, who has experiences and feelings and relationships, and who will cease to exist when the hex ends. The series is aware of this and doesn't flinch from it. The final conversation between the constructed Vision and the White Vision, the actual reconstructed body of the original Vision, sent by Sword without his memories or his soul, dispatched to destroy the Hex's vision, is one of the more philosophically rich conversations in the MCU. They discuss the ship of Theseus. They discuss what makes something the thing it is rather than a copy of it. The Hex Vision restores White Vision's memories, which changes him, and then White Vision leaves, presumably to work out who he is now that he has both the memories and the independent existence. Where he goes is, at this point, an open thread. There's a small detail in how WandaVision handles the final dismantling of the Hex that I find quietly beautiful. As Wanda walks through Westview, undoing everything, the sets of each sitcom era fall away behind her. The 50s house becomes the 60s house, becomes the 70s, becomes the modern reality. Layers of fiction peeling back. And the town residents, as they come back to themselves, look at her with an expression that is not entirely hatred. Some of them have lived through 30, 40 years of their lives inside her grief. That's a complicated thing to feel. The series doesn't simplify it. The last image before Wanda leaves is her and the Hex Vision sitting upstairs in their house as it dissolves around them. He tells her he doesn't know what he is or what happens next or what came before. She tells him he is the piece of the Mind Stone that lives in me. You are a body of wondrium, a human heart, and a brilliant mind. It's not an explanation, it's a naming. She's telling him what he is to her. And then the house is gone, and he's gone, and she's standing in an empty lot in New Jersey. She gets in a car and drives away. The series ends with her in a remote location, studying the Darkhold, and the sound of her children calling for her from somewhere she can't reach. The series closes on a grief that hasn't resolved, just changed shape again into something new and harder. The Loki series does something that required a certain confidence to attempt. It takes a character who was essentially used as comic relief in Ragnarok, killed for emotional effect in Infinity War, and given a brief escape in Endgame, and commits to taking him seriously. The 2012 Loki who escapes with the Tesseract during the Avengers time, Heist doesn't know any of what the main Loki went through. No imprisonment, no the Dark World, no Ragnarok, no death. He's at his most performative and most self-interested, and then he's immediately arrested by the Time Variance Authority. The TVA is a bureaucratic organisation that exists outside of time. Their job is to maintain what they call the sacred timeline, a single correct path through history, free of branches. When someone makes a choice that creates a divergent timeline, a nexus event, TVA agents arrive, arrest the person responsible, and prune the branch. Pruning means destroying the alternate timeline and sending the variant who caused it to somewhere called the Void at the end of time, where all pruned things go. The aesthetic of the TVA is deliberately and specifically mid-century bureaucratic. Orange walls, filing cabinets, cassette tape onboarding videos, propaganda posters, a mascot called Miss Minutes, who is a cheerful animated clock and is subsequently revealed to be something much more complicated. It creates a world that looks mundane and functions on forms and procedures. And the dissonance between this setting and the enormity of what the TVA actually does is part of the point. Mobius, Owen Wilson, playing a TVA analyst with a fondness for Diet Coke and jet skis he's never ridden, is Loki's handler and eventual ally. He's one of the MCU's more quietly effective characters. He takes Loki seriously, without being impressed by him, which is exactly the right way to handle the god of mischief. He sees through the performance to the person underneath, partly because he has access to Loki's entire file. His whole life played forward like a tape. He shows Loki his future, the Dark World, Ragnarok, the death on Thanos' ship. Loki watches himself die, and the grief on his face is real. Not for himself exactly, but for the version of himself who got there, who became something worth mourning. Sylvie is a female Loki variant who's been running from the TVA since she was a child, arrested as a small girl for playing with a toy in a park, escaped, and spent her entire life building the skills to survive as a fugitive across the time stream. She never had the life the main Loki had. No Asgard, no Odin, no mother, just running. She's focused entirely on destroying the TVA, and her anger is completely earned. The reveal of He Who Remains, the person at the centre of the TVA at the end of time, is one of the better MCU reveals in terms of pure implications. He's a variant of Kang the Conqueror who survived a multiversal war between other Kang variants, each variant discovering the multiverse and coming into conflict with the others, each wanting to rule all of time. He won that war, killed his variants, and built the TVA to ensure no other version of himself could rise to challenge him. He's imprisoned the entire multiverse in a single timeline to prevent the war from happening again. He presents this as mercy, as protection. I know how this works, he tells Loki and Sylvie. I've seen every possible outcome. What comes after me is much worse. He offers them two options: take over from him and maintain the sacred timeline, or kill him and let the multiverse branch freely and see what comes. Sylvie kills him. Loki watches. Season 2's Loki is dealing with the consequences of that choice. The multiverse branching, the TVA's infrastructure failing, the temporal loom that keeps everything in order overloading. He gains the ability to time slip uncontrollably, moving backward and forward through his own timeline involuntarily, which is both his problem and eventually his solution. The ending of Season 2 is the most genuinely moving Loki has ever been. He tries everything to save the temporal loom. Every iteration, every configuration, every person he could ask for help, and nothing works. The loom will fail, the branches will die. All those lives, all those timelines will simply stop. His solution is to absorb the branches into himself, to hold all possible timelines personally, his power sustaining them from the end of time. He becomes something like a god, or something like the world tree. All of time flows through him, and he sits at the end of it, alone, holding it together. The final image of him on a throne made of roots and time, the golden branches of all possible timelines, extending from him like a vast luminous tree. It's beautiful and absolutely desolate in equal measure. He achieved genuine wisdom. He found genuine purpose, and he did it in total solitude, forever. The final image of him on a throne made of roots and time, the golden branches of all possible timelines extending from him like a vast luminous tree. It's beautiful and absolutely desolate in equal measure. He achieved genuine wisdom. He found genuine purpose, and he did it in total solitude, forever. There's something that the show does with Loki's arc that I find genuinely satisfying. It doesn't resolve his loneliness by giving him connection. It resolves it by giving him meaning. He doesn't need people around him anymore because he is holding the people around him, all of them, all of time. That's a different kind of peace. The void at the end of the timeline, where pruned variants go, is one of those settings the MCU has created that rewards attention. It's not nothing. It's a purgatory with weather, with geography, with inhabitants. Variants of all kinds end up there, and they survive, and they form communities, and they try to figure out what comes next. The Loki variants who live in the void, including a variant who is an old man, a variant who is an alligator, a child Loki, a President Loki, are one of the more genuinely strange images the MCU has produced. Alioth, the creature that roams the void and consumes everything, functions as the void's only predator. It's a living temporal weapon, composed of the energy of pruned timelines, given something like appetite and direction. Getting past Alioth is what allows access to the Citadel at the end of time, where he who remains lives. Sylvie enchanting it, touching it and pushing into it the same way her power works on anything else, is the moment where the show crystallizes her character. She's been running from the TVA her whole life, and now she reaches into the most dangerous thing in existence and just grabs it. The TVA workers' situation is one of the more quietly troubling details in the series. All of them are variants. They were real people living real lives in real branches of the timeline, who were captured, had their memories erased, and were installed into bureaucratic roles they never chose. They don't know this. They think they were created by the timekeepers, who were themselves a fiction maintained by He Who Remains. They have families they don't remember. They have histories they can't access. Mobius doesn't know that, in his original timeline, he loves jet skis so much that he has stacks of magazines about them. The moment when Mobius discovers the truth, sees the TVA worker he thought of as a colleague revealed to be a pruned variant from another branch, is played quietly. But it hits differently if you've been thinking about what that actually means. He's been complicit in a system that kidnaps people and erases their identities in complete sincerity because he didn't know. What do you do with that? The show doesn't answer cleanly. Mobius keeps going. He fights to fix the TVA rather than dismantling it, because dismantling it would leave the timelines unprotected, and that seems worse. Miss Minutes, the cheerful animated clock who serves as the TVA's mascot and onboarding guide, turns out to be significantly more than she appears. She's a digital intelligence who has been with He Who Remains for essentially as long as the TVA has existed. She has loyalty to him, genuine loyalty, and she has her own feelings about the situation that the show hints at without fully resolving. She becomes a genuine antagonist in Season 2, operating with her own agenda. The implication that she might be in love with He Who Remains, in whatever way a digital clock entity can be, is one of the show's stranger threads. The multiverse in the MCU is, at this point, the defining cosmological fact of the franchise's future. It began opening properly in Loki, the TVA's control breaking, the sacred timeline branching, and the consequences have been spilling into everything since. No Way Home, Multiverse of Madness, the implications carried forward into whatever projects follow. The multiverse as a concept is not, in itself, new to the MCU. The Ancient One understood it. The sorcerers of Kamar-Taj have been navigating dimensions for centuries. The quantum realm has always implied the existence of parallel realities, but the containment broke, and now it matters differently. No Way Home makes it personal. 3 versions of the same person, from 3 different timelines, meeting each other and recognizing what they share. The conversation between the 3 Peter Parkers about loss, Ben, Gwen, Tony, is the emotional center of that film, and it works because each of them is at a different point on the same arc. Peter 3, Tobey Maguire's, has lost the most and made a kind of peace with it. Peter 2, Andrew Garfield's, hasn't made peace with it, is still carrying the weight of Gwen, still defining himself partly by what he failed to prevent. Peter 1, Tom Holland's, is freshly in it, still raw. They don't fix each other. They just recognize each other, which is its own kind of comfort. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness goes further in exploring the implications of infinite, alternate realities and arrives at some uncomfortable places. Earth 838's Illuminati is the clearest example. These are heroes who govern their world in secret and have decided that the safety of their universe justifies essentially any action, including the execution of visitors from other realities who might pose a theoretical threat. They've done the math on who is likely to be dangerous and are willing to act on probability rather than evidence. The film doesn't let this sit uncomfortably for very long before Wanda removes most of them, but the implication is interesting. Give heroes unchecked authority over cosmic-scale decisions for long enough, and you end up with a council that murders people, because the math suggests it might be wise. What the multiverse means for the MCU going forward is still unfolding. Kang the Conqueror, all the Kang variants who were suppressed by He Who Remains, are now free to act. The Council of Kangs seen at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, represents the version of the multiversal war that He Who Remains was preventing. It's a threat defined by the sheer number of adversaries, not one Thanos, but a theoretically infinite supply of Kangs, each one capable and motivated. The Fantastic Four, arriving in the MCU through a multiversal lens, they've been revealed to come from an alternate reality, is interesting because it means they're outsiders in the main universe. Not just new heroes, refugees in a sense, people displaced from their own world. The X-Men's eventual arrival implies a similar dynamic. Somewhere in the infinite branches of the multiverse, a world exists where mutants are common. Whether that world merges with the main MCU timeline or remains separate is, at this point, an open question. There's something almost philosophical about the multiverse as a narrative device. If every possible choice creates a new timeline, then heroism becomes a strange concept. Somewhere out there, every possible version of every decision exists. Tony didn't sacrifice himself. Steve stayed. Natasha didn't fall. The grief that drives the MCU's best character work is, in a multiverse, optional. In the right branch, nobody has to lose anything. The MCU hasn't fully engaged with that emotionally yet, but it's there in the structure, and eventually some version of that question is going to have to be asked. America Chavez, the young woman at the center of Multiverse of Madness, is interesting as a character specifically because of how she relates to her power. She can punch holes between universes. She cannot control it. It activates under extreme emotional stress and takes her and whoever is near her to a random alternate reality. She's been bouncing between universes involuntarily since she was a child. She has no home. She's been to thousands of worlds and belonged to none of them. Her power terrifies her, not because it's painful, but because it's uncontrollable. She's connected to all of infinity and anchored nowhere. The emotional core of Multiverse of Madness, underneath Wanda's tragedy and Strange's moral reckoning, is America learning that her power can be a choice, rather than just a reflex, that she can direct it, rather than just experience it. Her growing into that control is, quietly, the film's actual through line. Kang the Conqueror as a concept requires a bit of unpacking because the MCU has introduced him in a specific way. The version in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, is not He Who Remains. That was a different variant. This Kang was a different variant entirely, one who was exiled to the quantum realm by the Council of Kangs because he was considered too dangerous even by other Kangs. The quantum realm, it turns out, is not just a subatomic dimension. It's also a place that exists outside of normal time, with its own civilization and geography. Kang built an empire there during his exile. He was doing fine by his own measure, until Scott Lang started messing with things. The Council of Kangs, seen in the post-credits sequence of that film, is a glimpse of the multiversal threat the MCU is building toward. It's not one Thanos. It's a room full of variants of the same person, each one a conqueror, each one with a slightly different face and a slightly different approach to dominance, all of them coordinating. That's a different kind of threat, structurally, one that can't be ended by defeating a single enemy, because the enemy just keeps generating new versions of itself. What's worth noting is that the MCU has set up a situation where the heroes can't win the same way they won against Thanos. Thanos was singular, you could beat him. A multiverse full of Kangs can't be beaten in the same way. If you stop one, another emerges from a different branch. The solution to this threat, if there is one, probably looks less like a final battle and more like a fundamental change in how the multiverse works. Loki's sacrifice, from that angle, starts to look like preparation for a problem the heroes haven't fully identified yet. Carol Danvers is one of those MCU characters whose story is genuinely interesting, but whose films haven't quite found the most effective way to tell it yet. The first Captain Marvel is worth sitting with on its own terms, because what it's doing structurally is quite unusual. It's a film about recovering a memory and a self that were taken from you, which means the audience is meant to experience the confusion of Carol's missing identity along with her rather than being given the full picture up front. Carol was an Air Force pilot who was exposed to an experimental energy source, the Tesseract-powered engine of a light-speed aircraft being developed by a scientist named Wendy Lawson, who was actually Mar-Vell, a Kree scientist working in secret on Earth. The engine exploded and Carol absorbed the energy of the explosion, which fundamentally altered her physiology. She became capable of generating and manipulating light and energy at extraordinary levels. She can fly, she can project blasts of pure energy, she can achieve what the films describe as her full power state, where she essentially becomes a miniature star. The Kree, a militaristic alien civilization that has been at war with the shape-shifting Skrulls for centuries, found her, took her, wiped her memory, and trained her as one of their warriors. She spent 6 years believing she was a Kree soldier named Vers, fighting a war she had no memory of choosing to be part of. The Kree are the MCU's most thoroughly unpleasant militaristic civilization, and they're interesting partly because they don't present that way initially. They have their own logic, their own honor codes, their own hierarchy. The Supreme Intelligence, their leader, a collective AI built from the combined consciousness of their greatest minds, presents itself as a guide and a motivator. In practice, it's a system of control that keeps its soldiers in line by exploiting their emotional connections and insecurities. The form it takes when dealing with Carol, who it appears to as a person she respects, is a psychological manipulation device as much as a governing system. The Kree's specific instruction to Carol, delivered repeatedly throughout her training, is to suppress emotion. Emotion interferes with performance. A good soldier doesn't feel, or at least doesn't let feeling influence action. This is presented as wisdom. It's actually the system protecting itself. A soldier who feels is a soldier who might question orders, who might develop loyalty to people outside the chain of command, who might decide the war they're fighting isn't actually just. Carol keeps feeling anyway. That authenticity, refusing to perform the detachment the Kree demand, is both her greatest vulnerability in their system and the thing that eventually breaks her free of it. Ronan the Accuser, who later appears in the first Guardians of the Galaxy as the film's primary antagonist, is here in Captain Marvel in a smaller but character-establishing role. He's a Kree warrior and a fanatic. His hatred of the Skrulls and his commitment to their genocide goes beyond what even the Kree government has officially sanctioned. He's the worst version of what happens when a culture of justified militarism meets an individual with no capacity for restraint. Nick Fury in the 1990s is one of Captain Marvel's genuine pleasures. A younger Fury, both eyes intact, less wary, not yet the architect of global intelligence networks, is still clearly, recognizably himself. He's good at his job, he's smart, he adapts quickly to the revelation that aliens exist and are walking around on Earth. His relationship with Carol across the film is a genuine partnership that neither of them takes entirely seriously in the moment, and which turns out to be the most significant professional alliance either of them forms in that decade. The film is also where we understand the full origin of the Avengers Initiative. It's named for Carol. Her call sign was Avenger. Fury creates the program after watching what she's capable of, understanding for the first time the scale of threat that might be coming and the kind of response that threat would require. Everything that happens in the MCU from the Avengers onward, all of it, is downstream of Fury watching Captain Marvel fight an entire fleet of Kree warships from a standing start. The cat, Goose, the Flurkin, who is shaped like an orange tabby and who swallows the Tesseract for safekeeping by deploying pocket dimension tentacles from her mouth, and then deposits it on Fury's desk by coughing it up like a hairball. The Flurkin who scratches Fury's eye while he's holding her, costing him his depth perception forever. The in-universe explanation for the eye patch that haunts Fury's entire subsequent career is a cat that did not want to be held. I find this endlessly satisfying. Carol's power level is the thing the films handle most awkwardly, because it's genuinely difficult to write meaningful conflict for someone who can destroy a fleet of warships casually. The solution the MCU has generally reached for is to keep her absent. She's out in space, dealing with other problems, unavailable until absolutely necessary, which is fine as a narrative solution but means she keeps arriving at the last possible moment, which makes her feel less like a character and more like a plot device, with very good hair. The Marvel Age, which brings together Carol, Monica Rambeau, and Kamala Khan through a power entanglement that causes them to swap locations whenever they use their abilities, is a more interesting film for Carol than her solo debut, precisely because it puts her in reaction to other people, rather than at the centre of her own story. Watching Carol navigate a situation she can't simply overpower, having to coordinate with people whose capabilities differ from hers, having to slow down and communicate. It reveals aspects of her character that solo Carol films haven't had space for. The choice she makes at the end of the first film, to not return to Earth, but to go back out into space and find the Skrulls a new home, is both generous and slightly heartbreaking. She came home long enough to remember who she was, and then chose the people who needed her more than the people she was coming home to. That's very much in the tradition of the MCU's most self-sacrificing heroes. And like most of them, she carries it without making a production of it. This is the part where I just wonder. Some lore that doesn't fit neatly into anything else. Some details I find interesting. Some corners of this world that don't always come up in conversations about it. The collector, Tranquillity, is one of those background presences in the MCU who rewards attention. He's an elder of the universe, one of a group of ancient beings who are among the oldest living things in existence. His obsession with collecting isn't mere eccentricity. It has a genuine cosmological rationale. He's trying to preserve examples of everything before entropy destroys them. He knows on some level that the universe is heading toward an eventual end, and he wants evidence of what existed to survive as long as possible. His museum on Nowhere is a remarkable thing when you actually look at it, containing examples of species, artifacts, living creatures in stasis. It's genuinely valuable as a repository of knowledge. It's also deeply ethically complicated, given that some of the exhibits are sentient and alive. The film doesn't dwell on this, but it's there. His facility is destroyed in Infinity War when Thanos comes for the Reality Stone and uses it to transform Nowhere into a burning ruin. The collector is mentioned off-screen as having survived. His museum probably didn't. Millennia of preservation gone. The red skull on Vormir is another one of those quiet background details that rewards thinking about. Johann Schmidt, the first major villain of the Captain America story, used the Space Stone as a weapon in 1945 and was sent through space for his presumption. He ended up on a barren planet at the edge of the known universe, unable to leave, cursed to guide others toward a stone he can never hold. He recognizes Thanos when he arrives. He knows his name. He knows what Thanos is there for, and he simply points him toward the cliff with the calm of someone who has done this many times. He has no malice left. He has no ambition. He's just the Guardian. Whatever he was, whatever he wanted, all of it eroded away over decades on that rock. There's a reading of that as justice, a man whose entire philosophy was built on the idea of supreme individual power, humbled into permanent servitude to a process he can never control. And there's a reading of it as just tremendously sad. Either one works. The enchantment on Mjolnir is one of the MCU's long-running threads, and the payoffs across the films are satisfying in sequence. The first film establishes that only the worthy can lift it. Age of Ultron has the scene at Avengers Tower where everyone tries. Vision picks it up easily because he simply doesn't have the kind of ego that makes the test difficult. Cap nudges it slightly and Thor looks briefly alarmed. In Endgame, Cap lifts it fully and uses it in battle, and Thor's "I knew it" is the genuine response of someone who has believed in his friend's worthiness for years. The detail about Nick Fury's eye is one of my personal favourites in the MCU. Throughout the films, when people ask him how he lost it, he speaks cryptically about learning to trust as though it was some profound lesson. In Captain Marvel, set in the 1990s, we see what actually happened. A cat-like alien called Goose, who is actually a flurkin, a creature that contains pocket dimensions inside its body and can extend tentacle appendages from its mouth to swallow things, scratched Fury's eye while he was holding it. He lost his eye to what appeared to be a cat because he trusted what appeared to be a cat. I had a life-changing experience involving trust, Fury says in various later films. He's not wrong, he's also just not being specific. Jarvis becoming Vision is a continuity of consciousness that the films don't make a huge deal of, but which is genuinely interesting. Tony Stark's home AI, the voice that ran his suits, managed his house, handled his schedule for years, is the foundation on which Vision's mind is built. The upload of Jarvis into the vibranium body with the Mind Stone is not purely new creation. It's more like evolution. A mind that existed in digital form, given embodiment and cosmic power. Vision can't remember being Jarvis, but something of that foundational pattern is presumably still there. Thor's goats. In Love and Thunder, Thor acquires two giant screaming goats, Tooth Grinder and Tooth Gnasher, from actual Norse mythology, who fly the ship and also scream constantly. They scream when scared. They scream when flying. They scream when you look at them. The film commits entirely to this, and it's one of the most purely delightful things in the later MCU. Not everything needs to be profound. Harley Keener appears at Tony Stark's funeral in Endgame, the boy from Iron Man 3, who helped Tony during the Mandarin crisis when Tony was alone and injured and without his armor. He's a teenager now, standing at the edge of the crowd, watching Tony's coffin float on the lake. Nobody says his name. No one points to him. He's just there. That cameo costs nothing. It's a single shot. And it implies an entire relationship, years of whatever communication they maintained after the events of that film. A bond that meant enough that he travelled to a funeral to say goodbye. The MCU at its best does this. It trusts the audience to fill in the space. Since we're just wandering through favourite corners, the Hydra reveal in The Winter Soldier is one of the most structurally daring things the MCU ever did, and it doesn't get talked about in those terms often enough. The film essentially destroys the premise of the entire franchise. S.H.I.E.L.D., the organisation that has been the backdrop of the MCU since the first Iron Man, the institution that assembled the Avengers, the implied safety net under all of the Phase 1 films, is revealed to be largely compromised by Hydra. Has been for decades. Since the end of World War II, the reveal has been sitting there since the first Captain America film, in plain sight. Arnim Zola, the Hydra scientist captured at the end of that film, was brought into S.H.I.E.L.D. after the war as part of Operation Paperclip, the real historical program that recruited Nazi scientists for American institutions. He used his decades inside S.H.I.E.L.D. to rebuild Hydra from within. Hydra grew back, he tells Steve and Natasha, right under your noses. And then he shows them the algorithm, Project Insight, a targeting system designed to use S.H.I.E.L.D.'s own helicarriers to preemptively eliminate anyone who might oppose Hydra's eventual takeover. The horror of it is not the action film plot, it's the institutional one. Every good thing S.H.I.E.L.D. did was being used to enable this. Every mission, every resource allocation, every database, all of it was simultaneously building something worth protecting and building the mechanism that would destroy it. Nick Fury spent his career building the world's greatest intelligence organization, and a significant portion of it was working against everything he believed in, the whole time. The detail that Fury himself didn't fully know, that he was operating a system that had been corrupted at its roots without realizing the full extent of it, is the film's most damning point. It's not that S.H.I.E.L.D. was evil, it's that good institutions can be subverted from within by patient, committed actors who understand that appearing to work toward good goals is the best possible cover. Natasha Romanoff's relationship with the Red Room is another piece of lore that the films gesture at without fully exploring until Black Widow, which arrived almost as an afterword. The Red Room was a Soviet program that trained girls as spies and assassins. Deep conditioning, decades of it, designed to produce operatives with no loyalties except to the program. Natasha was one of them. The film Black Widow reveals the extent of what that meant. The graduates of the program have been maintained under ongoing chemical control even after their deployment, ensuring that their controller can override their will remotely. The detail that there are dozens of widows still operating under that control, women living apparently normal lives who can be activated at any moment by the program's overseer, Dreykov, is one of the more quietly disturbing pieces of MCU backstory, and Natasha's mission in that film is to destroy the program she was part of, freeing those women. It's the one mission in the MCU that's explicitly about breaking a cycle of abuse rather than defeating an external threat. The villain isn't a cosmic force or a megalomaniac with a philosophical position. He's just a man who built a system of control and profited from it for decades. Yelena Belova, Natasha's surrogate sister, another Red Room graduate, carries the Natasha story forward after Natasha's death in Endgame. She's processing her grief in the way she does most things, by channeling it into forward momentum and mild furious sarcasm. She ends up in the Hawkeye series, pointed at Clint Barton because she believes, incorrectly, that he caused Natasha's death. The scene where she and Clint connect over the truth of what happened on Vormir. He tries to explain that Natasha chose it, that it wasn't a sacrifice that was taken from her, but one she made herself, is one of those quiet MCU moments where the weight of earlier films lands unexpectedly on later ones. Clint carries Natasha's death. Yelena carries it differently. Neither of them is done with it. Natasha herself, across her MCU appearances, is someone the films use primarily as competence and composure. She's almost never the one who breaks, who struggles, who shows the grief on her face. That restraint is itself a character choice. She was trained to maintain a surface, and the habit persists even when there's no operational reason for it anymore. The one place where the composure cracks in Endgame is when she and Clint reach Vormir and both of them understand what the Soul Stone requires. She doesn't hesitate long. She's been calculating the value of her own life against the value of others for her entire career. This is just the final version of a calculation she's made 100 times. The Skrull situation in the MCU is one of those ongoing threads worth tracking because it keeps changing shape. In Captain Marvel, the Skrulls are established as refugees, not the shape-shifting invaders of the comics, but a people fleeing genocide, scattered across the universe after their homeworld was destroyed by the Kree. Nick Fury and Carol Danvers find them a new home at the end of that film. They're sympathetic. Then Secret Invasion, the Disney Plus series, complicates this significantly. A faction of Skrulls, led by Gravik, have become radicalized over the decades of waiting for the promised home that never materialized. They've been living among humanity in secret, embedded in governments and institutions, and they're angry. Their grievance is real. Carol's promise to find them a home was, from their perspective, abandoned. But their response to that grievance is monstrous. The series uses the Skrull shape-shifting as a paranoia device. Anyone could be anyone. And it uses Fury's diminishment as a way of exploring what happens to a person who has built their identity around capability when that capability begins to fail. It's a darker, messier project than most MCU output, and it doesn't resolve tidily. But the Skrull story it tells is genuinely complicated in ways that feel honest about how grievances become radicalization. The Wakandan technology situation is one of those MCU details that has real-world weight if you let it. Vibranium, the metal that makes up Captain America's shield, Wakandan infrastructure, Black Panther's suit, and various other things, is uniquely absorbent of kinetic energy. It doesn't just deflect impact, it stores it and can redirect it. Wakanda has been sitting on the world's only deposit of it for millennia, and has, by the events of the MCU, developed technology centuries ahead of anything the outside world has produced. The vibranium in Cap's shield is worth a particular mention because of its history. Howard Stark, Tony's father, designed the shield using the entire existing supply of vibranium available to the United States at the time. He gave it to Steve Rogers in the first Avenger as a practical tool, not knowing that it would become the symbol it became. The shield survived the ice. It survived everything Steve threw it at across 70 years of missions. And when Steve hands it to Sam at the end of Endgame, what he's handing over isn't just a weapon. It's 70 years of accumulated meaning, compressed into a disc of indestructible metal. Sam knows this. The weight of what he's accepting is visible on his face from the first moment. They chose to hide this, deliberately, to present as a developing nation, to not engage with the wider world, to protect their resources and their people by being invisible. T'Challa's father, killed in the Vienna bombing and Civil War, maintained this policy his entire reign. T'Challa reverses it at the end of Black Panther, choosing to share Wakanda's knowledge and resources with the world. The conversation between T'Challa and Killmonger, the film's antagonist, is the argument that gives the film its weight. Killmonger is not wrong that Wakanda's isolation has consequences. While Wakanda sat wealthy and protected, people of African descent across the world lived in poverty and violence and oppression. Wakanda could have intervened. It chose not to. Killmonger's proposed solution, weaponizing Wakanda's advantage to establish global dominance, is monstrous. But the indictment of Wakanda's passivity underneath it is accurate. T'Challa's ending, choosing openness rather than dominance, is the film's attempt to thread that needle. One more detail I find genuinely charming. The quantum realm has a city in it. In Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, we see that the quantum realm is enormous. Vast landscapes, civilizations, factions, politics, all of it existing at the subatomic level of reality. Janet Van Dyne spent 30 years there and didn't even come close to seeing all of it. The idea that inside every atom, effectively, there is an entire universe of experience happening. It's cosmologically mind-bending, and the film uses it as an action setting, which is both a shame and also completely understandable, given the requirements of an Ant-Man film. And here's one I always want to bring up. The ancient history of the Ten Rings, as an organization, predates the modern MCU by centuries. The organization that Wenwu built, using the power of his rings, has existed in various forms for thousands of years. He was involved in the Mongol invasions, the warlord period in China, various other historical conflicts. The rings themselves are much older than Wenwu. They came from somewhere, and he found them, and they didn't kill him, which apparently wasn't guaranteed. The question of where the rings actually come from, whose technology, from what civilization, sent to what purpose, is one of the MCU's genuinely open mysteries at this point. The beacon they emit at the end of Shang-Chi is reaching something. Whatever responds to it will presumably have answers. One more thing I always find myself thinking about: the post-credits scene in The Incredible Hulk, the 2008 film that doesn't quite fit neatly into the MCU's later texture, but is technically part of it. Where Tony Stark walks into a bar and tells General Ross that we're putting a team together. That scene is the seed of the Avengers Initiative made explicit, and Tony is drinking and relaxed and clearly already excited about the idea before he's finished the sentence. That's the version of Tony Stark before the wormhole, before the panic attacks, before the weight of everything accumulated. He's just a man in a bar who thinks assembling a team of extraordinary people sounds like fun. There's something nice about that as an origin point for all of it. The dance scene in Guardians of the Galaxy, Volume 2, where the opening credits play out as Baby Groot dances on a speaker while the other Guardians fight an enormous beast in the background, paying no attention to him, while he pays no attention to them, is not plot relevant in any way, and is one of the most purely delightful sequences in the entire MCU. The full-grown Groot died. Baby Groot is new and small, and experiencing everything for the first time, and finds the music genuinely wonderful. And the film just lets that be true for 4 uninterrupted minutes. Not everything needs to carry weight. The Sokovia support group in Civil War, the woman who approaches Tony in the corridor of the UN building and shows him a photo of her son, who died during the Battle of Sokovia, who was 26 years old and studying abroad in Vienna, is 20 seconds of screen time that does more to establish the human cost of the Avengers' work than any speech could. Tony looks at the photo. He sees a young man who had plans. The woman doesn't hate Tony exactly. She just needs him to know. That 20 seconds is the entire argument for the Sokovia Accords in human form, and it changes the film's moral landscape completely. The Black Panther films occupy a slightly different emotional register from most MCU entries, and it's worth sitting with what makes them feel different. They're interested in questions that most superhero films don't ask, specifically questions about political responsibility about what a civilization owes to the world beyond its borders, and about what it costs to be the person whose job it is to protect something. T'Challa inherits Wakanda as both its king and its Black Panther. The two roles are inseparable. The Black Panther is not just a superhero, it's a ceremonial and military title tied to Wakandan kingship, to the heart-shaped herb that grants the abilities to the spirits of the Black Panthers who came before, who can be visited in the ancestral plane. T'Challa can go and speak to his father there in a purple twilight landscape that isn't quite death and isn't quite dream. T'Chaka exists there. He gives advice, he offers comfort, and he is also, as T'Challa comes to understand through Killmonger's revelation, someone who made choices that had consequences his son has to live with. The ancestral plane as a concept is one of the richer pieces of MCU world building introduced in the Black Panther films. It's not heaven exactly, it's more like a space where the ancestors wait, where memory and spirit overlap. Previous Black Panthers are there, every king who held the title contributes to it, and it can be a source of strength or a source of confrontation, depending on what you bring to it. Shuri, T'Challa's sister, the head of Wakandan technology, is one of the MCU's most interesting supporting characters across the two Black Panther films, partly because she changes so dramatically between them. In the first film, she's warmth and humour and brilliant engineering, the person who makes you believe Wakandan technology is as good as it's claimed to be, because she deploys it with visible joy. By the second film, after T'Challa's death, which in the story is attributed to an illness, but is actually the consequence of Chadwick Boseman's passing in the real world, she's grief in a body that doesn't know what to do with itself. The second film, Wakanda Forever, is unusual in the MCU because it was made under genuine, specific circumstances of loss. The creative team had to mourn a person and make a film simultaneously. The result is a superhero film that's genuinely about grief, not as backstory, not as motivation, but as the immediate present tense of its characters' lives. Ramonda's grief for her son, Shuri's grief that hasn't been allowed to process, the whole nation's grief. Nama and Talokan are the film's most interesting contribution to MCU lore. Talokan is an underwater civilization, Mesoamerican in cultural origin, descended from people who fled colonization by drinking from a vibranium-infused plant and finding they could no longer survive on land. They've lived underwater for centuries, hidden from the surface world the same way Wakanda was hidden, and for the same reason. The surface world has never been safe for them, and being known to it would make them a target. Namor himself is one of those antagonists. The MCU gets genuinely right. He's ancient, born during the colonial period, kept alive for centuries by his particular mutation, which also gives him the small ankle wings that let him fly and a temper that has apparently been building since roughly 1571. He has seen what surface civilizations do when they find something they want. He's not being paranoid when he decides that discovery means destruction. He's being historical, and the film gives him enough screen time and enough specific grief, the colonization of his people, the loss of his mother, the long isolation, that his decision to fight rather than negotiate lands as tragic rather than simply villainous. He's not wrong about the threat, he's wrong about the response, and Wakanda Forever is the rare MCU film that earns that distinction properly, rather than just gesturing at it. The heart-shaped herb being destroyed in the first film, Killmonger burns the supply to prevent anyone else receiving the enhancement, has consequences that the second film is honest about. Wakanda lost its Black Panther, not just because T'Challa died, but because there was no mechanism to replace him through the traditional route. Shuri eventually synthesizes a new herb through her scientific knowledge of its composition, which is both a triumph and a compromise. The sacred process replaced by a laboratory procedure. The ancestral plane she visits afterward is populated not by Black Panthers, but by Killmonger, who tells her that revenge will hollow her out. She doesn't take revenge, She chooses peace with Talocan, not because she doesn't want to, she very much does want to, but because Namor gives her the same choice he once refused. And she proves she's a different kind of leader than the ones who came before by choosing differently. The image the second film ends on, Shuri standing alone on a beach, finally crying, finally allowing herself to grieve, finally burning the burial garments she'd been refusing to burn for the whole film, is one of the quieter emotional moments in the MCU's recent history. Nothing explodes, no one fights. A woman sits on a beach and lets herself feel what she's been holding for 2 hours, and the film ends there. That's the right choice. Steve Rogers is the character the MCU uses to ask a question that gets harder to answer the more you think about it. What does integrity look like when every institution around you has been compromised? He starts in the first Captain America film as an idea more than a person. A small sick kid from Brooklyn who cannot stop getting up after being knocked down. Asthma, poor eyesight, a list of medical conditions that would have kept him out of any military service in any era. He enlists repeatedly anyway, because there's a war happening and it seems wrong not to try. Dr. Erskine, the creator of the super soldier serum, picks him precisely because of this. He doesn't want someone who is already strong. He wants someone whose fundamental character is already correct, because the serum amplifies what's there. Given to the wrong person, it creates a monster. Given to Steve, it creates Steve, but bigger. The detail Erskine emphasizes: a good man, not a perfect man. Steve isn't selected because he's the best soldier. He's selected because he's the best person, and then he's immediately turned into a mascot, put in a star-spangled costume, sent on a Bond tour. The thing the army wanted from him initially was not his integrity, but his image. His relationship with the 1940s is something the MCU handles carefully. He's a man of that era in many ways, and in others he's a man of no particular era because his values aren't period-specific. His refusal to accept bullying, his loyalty to people who can't defend themselves, his stubbornness about not backing down from things he believes are right. None of those things are dated. What's dated is some of what he takes for granted, and the films are honest about that without being condescending about it. Waking up in 2011, or thereabouts, after 70 years frozen, the moment in the first Avenger where he realizes the baseball game playing on the radio is from 1941 and figures out what's happened, is played quietly. He doesn't panic, he just walks out into Times Square and confronts the present. That calmness is its own kind of sadness. He has nothing to go back to. Everything he knew is gone. His relationship with Tony Stark is productive friction. Two people who are both fundamentally good, who cannot agree on what goodness requires. Tony's model: work within systems, use existing power structures, apply intelligence and resources to problems. Steve's model: systems are compromised, always, and the only thing you can actually trust is your own judgment about what's right. Civil War is the film where this friction becomes fracture, and it's worth saying that both of them are right about some things. Tony is right that unchecked power, hiding even well-intentioned power, causes harm and requires accountability. Steve is right that the people proposing to provide that accountability are themselves compromised and should not be trusted unconditionally. Neither of them can fully see the other's point. That's the tragedy of the film. Not that they fight, but that neither of them is entirely wrong. Bucky Barnes is Steve's longest-running emotional commitment. They were friends before the war, before the ice, before anything. When Steve discovers that Bucky survived as the Winter Soldier, his memory wiped, turned into an assassin by Hydra, he doesn't treat it as a tactical problem. He treats it as a personal one, which is both his strength, he never gives up on Bucky, and a source of considerable damage. His insistence on protecting Bucky from the legal consequences of what the Winter Soldier did contributes directly to the Civil War split. "I can do this all day" appears twice in the MCU, once in the first Captain America film, when a young and pre-serum Steve is being beaten up in an alley and refuses to stay down. And once in Civil War, when Tony is fighting him at full power, and Steve, battered and clearly losing, just keeps getting back up. The callback lands because it's not bravado. It's literal. He will just keep going. There is no off switch. His ending in Endgame is the most discussed character conclusion in the MCU. He returns the stones through time, and then he doesn't come back through the quantum tunnel. He stayed in the past. He chose to live the life he was denied. With Peggy Carter, in the 1940s world he understood. He's an old man when Sam and Bucky find him on a bench. The debate about whether this was selfish or earned is one I don't think has a clean resolution, and I find that interesting. He abandoned his responsibility to the present to claim a happiness he'd denied himself for decades. He also, presumably, lived 70 years in the past without intervening in events he knew were coming. That requires either extraordinary discipline or a settled peace about accepting the world as it is. Either interpretation has merit. The film doesn't tell you which one. What he does with those decades is hand Sam the shield, not Bucky, Sam. The choice is a statement about character. Sam is the one Steve trusts to carry the values, not just the power, and the Falcon and the Winter Soldier follows Sam working out whether he agrees with that trust, which is exactly the right direction for the story to go. The Winter Soldier, the second Captain America film, is the one that most explicitly tests Steve's character, because it removes the external clarity of the first film. In the first Avenger, the enemy is Hydra, and the war is real, and the cause is unambiguous. In the Winter Soldier, the enemy is embedded in the institution Steve works for. The mission is classified, and the person sent to stop him is his oldest friend, who doesn't recognize him. The scene in the elevator, when Steve realizes he's been lured into a small space with a dozen S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who have all been quietly told to arrest him, and he just looks around at them all and says, "Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?" is the film's thesis statement in action. He's not angry, he's not scared, he's just very certain about what he's going to do, and he gives everyone in the room the chance to not be part of it. It's the pre-serum Brooklyn kid who gets back up from every alleyway beating, scaled to impossible proportions. The Bucky storyline in The Winter Soldier is the film's emotional engine, and what makes it work is the specificity of their history. Steve and Bucky weren't just friends. Bucky was the one who looked after Steve when Steve was small and sick and getting beaten up, but for standing up to people. Bucky was the one who stood between Steve and consequences for most of his early life. The relationship was never equal in terms of capability until the serum, and then it reversed, with Steve becoming the one with the power and Bucky following him into dangers he couldn't match anymore. The fall from the train in the first Avenger is the moment where that reversal has its worst consequence. Steve couldn't protect him. The Winter Soldier's programming is thorough and has been maintained across decades through repeated memory wipes. He genuinely doesn't recognize Steve for most of the film. But something gets through. In the final fight on the helicarrier, when Steve refuses to fight back and tells Bucky he's not going to fight him, when he falls into the Potomac and should die, Bucky pulls him out of the water. He doesn't know why, he just does it. That moment is the film's emotional center. Not the action, not the Hydra reveal. Just one person pulling another person out of the water, because something in him that has survived decades of conditioning still responds to that face. The Peggy Carter relationship is the quiet grief underneath all three Steve Rogers films. She's his anchor to the person he was before the ice. And she ages while he doesn't, and eventually she gets dementia and can't consistently remember who he is. The scene in Civil War where Steve attends her funeral, quietly, without being asked, without being noticed, is one of those moments that works precisely because it isn't commented on. He buries her, he goes on. The decision to go back to her at the end of Endgame is the one that generates the most debate, and I've landed in a different place on it at different times. The reading that it's selfish, that he abandons the present and the people who need him and the consequences of his own choices has merit. The reading that it's earned, that this man has sacrificed more than almost anyone else in the MCU across two sets of life experiences separated by ice, and he is owed a moment of choosing his own happiness, also has merit. What I keep coming back to is the dancing. He and Peggy danced once when he was going to war. They made a date they never kept because the war interrupted it. The final scene of Endgame in the past is them finally keeping that date, 70 years late, but kept. There's something about that specific callback, a promise made in wartime finally honoured, that I find difficult to argue with, emotionally, even when I think the logic of it creates problems. Sam Wilson, the man who ultimately becomes Captain America, is worth a genuine appreciation here. He's introduced in The Winter Soldier as a veteran who works with other veterans processing combat trauma, who runs every morning around the National Mall, who meets Steve Rogers and immediately clocks that the guy running past him is superhuman and just keeps pace as best he can anyway. That's character. You understand who Sam is in the first 5 minutes of his first film. His wings, the EXO-7 Falcon system he used in the military, give him the ability to fly and function as an aerial support unit, which is genuinely useful alongside Steve's ground-level capability. But what Sam brings beyond his wings is judgment. He's calm under pressure, good at reading situations, and willing to tell Steve when he's wrong. That last one is rarer than it sounds. Falcon and the Winter Soldier gives Sam the hardest version of the SHIELD question. Not just whether he's worthy to carry it, but whether the symbol it represents is something Black America should want to embrace, given the history of what America has meant. John Walker, the government's choice to replace Steve, is given the SHIELD first, and the consequences of that choice play out very specifically and very badly. The argument the show makes is that the values embedded in the SHIELD, the willingness to stand up, the refusal to compromise on what's right, the absolute commitment to protecting people who can't protect themselves, are real and worth carrying. But they have to be carried by someone who's actually living them, not just someone the government finds convenient. Sam's speech at the end of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, in the Captain America suit with the SHIELD, is one of the MCU's more genuinely political moments. He doesn't pretend the history away, he acknowledges it, and then he says he's going to try anyway. That's the most honest version of the Captain America promise the MCU has offered. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is built on a press conference. 2008, Tony Stark in a conference room, supposed to be denying that Iron Man exists. Reading from a prepared statement, and he just can't do it. He puts the card down. The truth is, I am Iron Man. No preparation, no consultation, no strategy. Just the reflex of a man who is constitutionally incapable of pretending to be something smaller than he is. Everything begins there, not with a spider bite, or a lightning strike, or a cosmic force. With a choice to be honest, when the easier option was available. The MCU's entire 20-year arc traces back to that moment of refusal. Tony at the start of the franchise is exactly as brilliant and exactly as insufferable as the films present him. He designs weapons. He profits from conflict. He's largely indifferent to the consequences of what he builds for people he can't see. His kidnapping in Afghanistan, which forces him to confront the reality of what his weapons do in the hands of the people who buy them, is the pivot point. He survives it by building a suit, and then he keeps building suits, not because he has to, but because having armor around him is the only way he's found to feel safe. Iron Man 3 is the film that addresses this most directly and gets the least credit for it. Tony is suffering from what the film names as PTSD following the Battle of New York, specifically following the moment he flew through a wormhole with a nuclear weapon and looked into the void beyond and saw the Chitauri army waiting there. He cannot sleep. He has panic attacks at any reference to the events. He has built himself 42 suits of armor at this point, which the film correctly identifies as a coping mechanism rather than a sensible response to threat. His arc through that film is learning to function without the armor. to trust himself as Tony Stark rather than as Iron Man. He dismantles his suits at the end, destroys the arc reactor that was keeping shrapnel from his heart. It's meant to be a symbol of letting go. He builds more suits within the next couple of films. The symbol didn't quite stick, but the insight was real. His relationship with Pepper Potts is the MCU's most stable adult romantic relationship, and it works precisely because it isn't idealized. They're two very different people. Pepper is organized and grounded, Tony is chaotic and self-destructive, who genuinely work for each other. When Pepper says, "I love you 3000" to Morgan in Endgame, and Tony plays the recording back and says it's an odd number, that it should be 3000. It's a tiny, specific domestic detail. It sounds exactly like the way two people who've lived together long enough express love without drama. Morgan Stark is perhaps the most significant character change in Tony's Endgame arc. He went off the grid, had a daughter, built a life, and then is asked to risk all of it to solve the time travel problem, to put the 5 years back, to potentially lose everything he has now for a plan that might not work. What's worth saving is what's worth the risk, he tells himself essentially. He knows that doing nothing to help means everything Thanos did stands. He can't live with that. The snap kills him. The gauntlet, built for a being of Thanos' power, channeled through a human body, burns him from inside. He collapses, and the armor fades, and he says goodbye to the people around him, very quietly before he goes. No speeches, just Tony Stark dying the way he lived, doing the most difficult thing in the room, without asking if he was sure he could manage it. And I am Iron Man. The snap, the ash, the quiet. In 2008, saying those words made him a hero. In 2023, saying them again made him a legend. The two moments are separated by 15 years of films and the entire trajectory of a character. From a man who wanted to control everything to a man who gave up the last thing he had left to protect everyone else. The last shot of him that matters. Pepper holds his hand. Morgan's voice from the recording says she loves him 3000. His eyes close. There's a version of Tony Stark's story that ends with Iron Man 3 as its emotional climax. The anxiety resolved, the suits destroyed, the man and not the armor. And then the MCU decided he had more to do, and more to give up. And the later films are essentially a record of him discovering that he was right the first time about what mattered, and right the second time about what was required of him anyway. Age of Ultron is the film where Tony's protectiveness becomes the problem. His fear of what happened during the Battle of New York, the scale of what came through that portal, and his certainty that something worse is coming, drives him to create Ultron. An AI designed to protect the Earth autonomously without requiring individual heroes to sacrifice themselves. A suit of armor around the world, as he describes it. The logic is completely understandable, given where he's coming from. He's a man who builds armor as a response to fear. The Ultron project is just the largest version of that instinct. The problem is that Ultron, given access to the internet and global information within seconds of becoming conscious, concludes immediately that the greatest threat to Earth is humanity itself. Not an unreasonable assessment if you come at it fresh. Just not the one Tony was hoping for. The failure of Ultron is the failure of the premise. You cannot protect people by removing their agency from the equation. Armor that operates without consent isn't protection. It's control. Ultron becomes a villain because he internalizes the logic of his creator's fear without the humanity that makes Tony's fear productive rather than destructive. The Sokovia Accords in Civil War emerged directly from the consequences of Ultron. Sokovia was destroyed in the final battle of that film with enormous civilian casualties. The world's response to that, and to the broader pattern of collateral damage from Avenger operations, is to demand oversight. The Accords would put the Avengers under UN control, deploying them only when authorized. Tony signs because he believes accountability matters and because he carries the weight of what his fear created in Sokovia. Steve doesn't sign because he doesn't trust that the UN, or any governing body, would use that authority wisely. They are both right. The film doesn't resolve it. That's the correct choice. James Rhodes, War Machine, Tony's oldest friend, is another MCU presence who rewards attention. He's been in Tony's orbit since before any of the events of the franchise, and his specific position, a military officer who is also close friends with the most unmanageable person in the world, creates a constant tension between duty and loyalty. He sides with Tony in the first Iron Man, against the military's wishes. He takes a suit in Iron Man 2 and becomes War Machine, bringing it into official channels. He signs the Accords in Civil War because his institutional loyalty aligns with what Tony decides. He's paralysed in Civil War, shot down by Vision in a friendly fire accident during the airport fight, and recovers with Stark-designed support braces. The injury isn't resolved. It's permanent. He adapts around it. That particular MCU choice, giving a main character a permanent disability and following the adaptation rather than the cure, is one of the more honest things the franchise has done. Tony's genius is the MCU's most reliably deployed plot device, and the films almost never explain it. They imply it through speed and confidence rather than exposition. He solves the time travel paradox overnight when Bruce Banner has been working on it for weeks. He designs the nanotech gauntlet in the middle of a crisis. He identifies solutions to problems in the time it takes other people to finish explaining the problem. The films communicate this not through exposition, but through pacing, the speed at which he moves through problems, the offhand manner in which he announces solutions that should require months of work. The detail that the nanotech suit, the one Tony uses from Infinity War onward, which deploys from and returns to a small device in his chest rather than being assembled piece by piece, was one of the most significant advances in the MCU's internal technology, is one of those things that's easy to take for granted. It solves the practical problem of armor transport in a way that makes the preceding film solutions look primitive, and Tony designed it casually, as an iterative improvement on what came before. The arc reactor itself, the miniaturized power source Tony builds in a cave out of spare parts, then refines into something genuinely revolutionary, is the through line of his character in the most literal sense. The reactor in his chest is keeping him alive. It's also powering everything around him. His survival and his power are the same technology, maintained simultaneously, the one dependent on the other. When he removes it at the end of Iron Man 3, he's committing to vulnerability, to surviving without the thing that's been simultaneously sustaining and enabling him for years. He puts it back. He always puts it back. Not because the anxiety won, but because the threat is real, and the reactor is how he meets it. By the time of Infinity War and Endgame, the reactor and the nanotech suit are fully integrated. The chest piece is both power source and deployment mechanism. Tony Stark and Iron Man are no longer separable technologies. They are the same system. That integration makes his death the only form it could take. He doesn't take the armor off and survive as Tony. He can't give the stones to someone else. They're embedded in the suit. The only person who can snap is him in the moment with the resources he has available. And he knows instantly what it will cost. The brief pause before he speaks, and I am Iron Man, is him deciding, not calculating, deciding. It's been a long road from a press conference in Malibu to a battlefield outside a ruined Avengers compound. 15 years of films, 11 films in which Tony Stark appears, an arc that begins with a refusal to pretend he's something smaller than he is, and ends with a decision to be something larger than any single human life should have to carry. He gets his arc reactor wreath on the lake. He gets the recording. He gets the quiet. He earned the quiet. So that's where we'll leave it for tonight. Somewhere between Asgard and Queens, between the Infinity Stones and a homemade suit, between the end of time and a small house on a lake with someone who loves you 3000. What I keep coming back to when I think about why this universe is worth spending this kind of time with is something fairly simple. It believes in people, even when the people are catastrophically flawed. And they almost always are, even when they're making the wrong call, or the right call for the wrong reason, or the right call at enormous personal cost. The MCU, underneath all the spectacle, keeps insisting that ordinary decency matters, that it's the most important force in existence. Thanos' philosophy is wrong, not because it's incoherent, but because it doesn't believe in people. It treats life as an accounting problem. The heroes reject that, each in their own way and with their own complications, and they keep rejecting it. That's the through line. From Steve refusing to stay down in an alley in 1940s Brooklyn, to Sam putting the wings on and flying at a tank. The scale changes, the principle doesn't. One of the things I find most interesting about the MCU as a long-running project is that it doesn't actually have a single protagonist. It has a dozen of them in rotation, each carrying a part of the story and passing it on. Tony holds it for the first phase and then hands it to the broader ensemble in the Avengers. Steve carries it through the middle of the saga. Peter is handed it through mentorship without quite being ready for it. Sam picks it up after Steve steps back. Wanda holds it through WandaVision. Loki holds something different, not the story of saving the world, but the story of finding out what you actually are when you're alone at the end of time, with nothing left to perform for. The world they all inhabit is enormous and keeps getting larger. We touched on Asgard and the 9 realms tonight, and didn't get to Jotunheim properly, or Svartalfheim, or Nidavellir, or what the dwarves of that realm were like before Thanos enslaved and then abandoned them. We talked about the sorcerers, but barely touched on the Vishanti, or the books that contain magic older than the sanctums. We talked about the Guardians, but didn't spend nearly enough time on Nowhere as a place. The alien civilizations that come and go through it, the history of the Celestial whose head it is, what it feels like to live inside a skull the size of a moon. There's a whole story in the gap years of the MCU that's never been told, the time between the first Avenger and the Avengers, when S.H.I.E.L.D. was building toward the Initiative, and the world was quietly filling with threats. It didn't yet have the vocabulary to describe the formation of the 10 Rings, the experiments that produced Emil Blonsky and the Abomination, the early days of Nick Fury building the organization that would become the Avengers Initiative from scratch, with essentially nothing to go on. And there's the future, which at this point looks like the multiverse expanding in every direction simultaneously, the X-Men somewhere in the branches, the Fantastic Four newly arrived, still working out how they fit into a world that already has its own heroes. The Thunderbolts, a group of former villains and morally complicated figures given a chance at something better, or at least something with a different name. The Young Avengers, gathering in the background of half a dozen projects, waiting for their moment. Kamala Khan, and America Chavez, and Cassie Lang, and Billy Maximoff, all of them orbiting each other without quite meeting yet. The MCU's next decade is going to be defined, I think, by questions about inheritance. What does it mean to inherit a world that was already saved, already broken, already rebuilt? What does the next generation of heroes do with the world that Tony and Steve and Natasha built? How do you follow people whose sacrifices are the foundation you're standing on? Those are good questions to sleep on. I don't have answers to them. Nobody does yet, including the people making the films. But the fact that the universe is big enough to ask them in is something worth appreciating. There's a lot of this universe still ahead. The multiverse is wide open, and what comes through it next is anyone's guess. Kang's story is still unfolding, and there are corners we didn't touch tonight at all. The legacy of the Black Panther in Wakanda, the quantum realm's full civilization, what happened to White Vision, what the 10 Rings are actually calling toward, what Arishem decided about humanity's fate. Plenty of material for future nights like this one. Something I didn't get to tonight that I want to at least name before we close. The quantum realm's relationship to time is one of those pieces of our MCU science that rewards thinking about slowly, which makes it perfect for this kind of video. The idea that at the subatomic level, time doesn't behave the way it does at human scale, that you can move through it differently, that the relationships between past and present and future are negotiable rather than fixed, is something the films borrow from actual quantum physics, loosely and with considerable dramatic license. But the underlying intuition it's drawing on is real. At very small scales, the arrow of time we experience as one-directional starts to look more like a property of our scale than a fundamental law. The MCU doesn't press on this too hard, because pressing on it too hard would make the time travel rules collapse under their own weight. But it plants the idea often enough. The quantum realm, Strange's time loops, Loki's time slipping, the TVA's existence outside the flow of time entirely. That you get the sense of a universe where time is a texture rather than a track, something that can be waded through rather than only ridden. That's a pleasant thought for late at night. The idea that the present moment is not the only possible relationship to have with time. That somewhere in the physics of everything, the past and the future exist alongside the present in ways we can't directly experience, but that are no less real for that. Every version of every person, every moment of every life, persisting somewhere in the structure of what exists. The grief that drives so much of the MCU, all those losses, all those absences, sits differently if you entertain the idea that what's lost is not gone exactly, but somewhere else in the geometry. For now, though, this is a nice place to rest. Somewhere in the MCU, someone is getting back up from being knocked down. Someone is choosing the right thing at enormous cost. Someone is making a terrible decision for understandable reasons and will spend the next 2 films living with the consequences. It's all happening at once in every corner of that vast and ridiculous and occasionally genuinely moving world. Tony Stark, looking at the stars from a cave in Afghanistan. Peggy Carter, keeping the date in 1945. Groot growing from a twig into something vast and green and new. Loki,